Okay, hi everybody. There's probably no one here, which is fine, because this is day one on a brand new channel, and that's okay. If anyone wants to scroll back to this, I am Lily, and I am covering the trial, the murder trial of Karen Reed. And Karen Reed, if you're not familiar, is on trial for murder. Allegedly murdering her uh, Boston police officer boyfriend. And so we are going to cover the trial. We are a day behind, but that is okay because we have plenty of time. So the schedule for court is Monday, Wednesday, full days. So I believe like 9 to 4, 5, maybe 6. Tuesdays and Thursdays are half days. So they'll be starting at 9 and then going until normal lunch break time. And then that's it for Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then nothing on Friday. So we have Friday to kind of catch up. So I'm going to do day 1 today, day 2 tomorrow, even though it's day 3. And then starting next week, I will be fully live, the beginning of the day to the end. I do have some shifts that I will be working. So if I do have to work and trial is still happening, luckily I stream where I work now. So I will be popping in and out, but I will leave it up for you guys if you'd like. So that's that. I'm just going to jump into starting day 1 with opening statements. I'm not going to cover the jury instructions because if you want to go back and see it, it's up on like Court TV and Law and Crime and all that stuff, but it's pretty basic. There are 17 jurors, 12 will be deliberating. This is supposed to be an 8-week trial. It was first being called to be a 6-week trial, but it is actually an 8-week trial. So because there's not Fridays, which takes a whole day plus another basically whole day. So you're basically losing 2 days of trial of court due to Tuesdays and Thursdays being half days and no Fridays. But in my opinion, that's really good for the jury. They have the opportunity to still go to work and make money and not lose everything. Not going to work for 8 weeks and getting paid pennies to the dollar as a juror can be really detrimental. So maybe we'll have a conversation about that later. I have to sneeze. Okay, so to prep for trial, I have done little to no research. I did a Lily's News episode on the Insane Games channel. Now, all my content is going to be here. I did an episode about it, just kind of the basic outlines of it, that there is a potential cover-up, there's a federal investigation happening. This is not federal court, so that there really shouldn't be too much necessary mention of it, but if it comes up, it'll come up. It's a tough one. We'll talk about it when it happens. I am not a lawyer. I want to make that very clear. I am not a lawyer. I have no legal training. I am not a lawyer. I've never been a lawyer. I will never be a lawyer. I just have so much interest and like love for the trial process. So, here I am doing this. I have my Duncan. Mind you, this is happening in Massachusetts, so I think that's just right. I have plenty of water. I do have a bagel that I will probably be disappearing and eating in a minute. We have opening statements pulled up, and if you have any questions, I will do my best to answer, but I wanted to kind of create a space where people who aren't lawyers can kind of enjoy people's company. And watching this, I don't have some sort of like legal standard to kind of stick to. I'm going into this basically as a juror myself, hence the Chatty Juror, and I will be talking. So if you don't like that, sorry, there's plenty of live streams like on Court TV, on Law and Crime and stuff like that. That's just the boring trial. So let's just get into it. Let's get into it. All right, let's do this here. All right, opening.
So with that, it's time for opening statements, and whenever you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you.
And I ask only that you keep your voice up, please.
Do my best. Good morning.
Sound may be an issue. If it
As
is too
Your Honor was
quiet, please
telling
let me know.
this is one of the two opportunities that I will get to address. The first of which right now, essentially what I'm going to attempt to do, and I know you've heard over the course of the impoundment process, a number of different witnesses that were listed out as far as potential witnesses in this case. So what my intent here is to provide as much of a roadmap as I can through those waters and help you to navigate sort of who these people are and what relation they have to this case. We start with John O'Keefe. John O'Keefe grew up in Braintree. He was 46 years old when he passed. He was the son of John O'Keefe Jr. and Margaret or Peggy O'Keefe. He was a brother to Paul O'Keefe and to his sister, Kristen Furbush. Kristen was married, so John's brother-in-law was a man named Stephen Furbush, and they had two children who were very young in 2013. Now, in 2013, Kristen, unfortunately, tragically passed away, succumbing to cancer in November of 2013. Within months of that, Mr. O'Keefe's brother-in-law and Kristen's husband, Stephen, passed away as well. Now, initially, when John O'Keefe's sister passed away, sort of the initial plan for that situation was that John O'Keefe was going to move in with Stephen Furbush and the kids and assist as far as raising them. And then when Stephen passed away a few months after his wife, before those plans could be finalized, John O'Keefe then moved in with his niece and nephew and assumed the parental role and assumed legal guardianship with respect to both of those children. Now, he was assisted in this by a great number of people within the town of Canton where the Furbushes lived and where John moved into the home with the two children there. There were other parents within the neighborhood, other parents within the children's age group. You'll hear from a number of them over the course of this trial, but they include Mrs. Carrie Roberts and Mrs. Jennifer McKay. They helped Mr. O'Keefe out during those initial stages and during the time that he assumed this role. He also got help from his work. John O'Keefe was a proud member of the Boston Police Department, had been for many years. He had been a patrolman prior to moving in with children and assuming this role. Boston Police Department helped him greatly as far as positioning him into more of a desk role, working in the sex offender unit with more regular hours to sort of assimilate himself to this new life and this new role that he assumes with his children. Initially, John O'Keefe lived in the house with the kids. However, in 2018,
Hey, David, how are you?
Sort of a new home that they could have as their own. That home is located also within the town of Canton, sort of on the Stoughton side of Canton at One Meadows Avenue. John O'Keefe
Thanks for
raised
popping in. Appreciate it.
assuming guardianship
Hope you're doing
for them
good.
for about 8 years.
St. Jude's Play Live.
Niece, who was the elder of the two, was about 14 at the time that John O'Keefe died. His nephew was about 11 years old at the time that John O'Keefe died. January 28th, 2022. It was a relatively typical day. It was a Friday going into a Saturday of January 29th. Sort of typical in the sense of most sort of suburban parents. There were a lot of activities, weekend sports, practices, games, things of that nature.
Thank you. Have a good day.
That the O'Keefe and Furbush family had to look forward to. One little difference when it came to that particular day of January 28th and the 29th is the weather. So there had been predicted and there was going to be a snowstorm, an insignificant one. A blizzard essentially was coming in overnight that Friday and the Saturday, lasting through most of the day on Saturday the 29th. And as a result of that, most of those sort of typical, weekend routine activities that would keep most people, including those within the town of Canton, busy, have been canceled ahead of time. Everybody knew what was coming. Everybody knew essentially you weren't going to leave your house all that much the following day. Now, also on January 28th, Mr. O'Keefe had received some news in respect to his niece. So his niece and her best friend were in 8th grade at the time, going into high school in the fall of 2022. They both applied to a private school called Bishop, and they both found out on the 28th that they had been accepted to that school. So the friend, as well as her father, a gentleman by the name of Michael Camerano, who's both he and his wife, Catherine Camerano, were friendly with John O'Keefe. They had children around the same ages as both John's niece and his nephew. And
I just want to pause real quick and make mention of just how awkward this courtroom setup is. They moved to a much smaller courtroom than originally planned, than when they were doing all their hearings and stuff, due to the witness box and the jury box. So where the witness would be sitting and testifying, a good chunk of the jury would not be able to see the witness's face. So they had motions, thus, which is why trial kind of started a week late. Anyway, these motions kind of came in a little late, in my opinion, to change how the courtroom is set up, to make sure that the jury is able to see each witness's face as they testify. So now they are kind of squished into this very awkward setup. As you can see right here, this is Karen Reed, and this man here is the prosecution. So they're Massachusetts, one of the 13 original colonies, is probably one of the only states that has the most outdated terminology when it comes to everything. But I will be calling this the stateside prosecution or state or whatever. They will sometimes say Commonwealth and all that stuff. So this man here is representing the state, who is pressing charges against Karen Reed. And as you can see, he is 3 chair lengths away from her. Very close. She is sitting sideways. This is not the jury. These folks back here are not the jury. We will not be seeing the jury's faces. That's not an option at all. This is just the audience. These are just the people here. Mainly it's going to be family, close relatives, either like legal sort of like assistance, maybe. So it's a very small, there's not a lot of room in there. There's going to be some press, but there's not going to be a bunch of like randos being able to get in, just due to the size of this courtroom that they had to use to please the jury being able to see the witness.
And they had come over to their house on Meadows Ave that evening to celebrate the girls getting into that school. The nephew of John, the 11-year-olds, was sleeping over a friend's house that night. He left that home sometime around 7 p.m. or so, got picked up, and went to sleep over at his friend's house. John O'Keefe and Michael Camerano then decided to travel out to a local establishment on Washington Street called C.F. McCarthy's Bar and Restaurant. You're going to hear testimony, and you're going to see surveillance video, and you're going to see receipts and all kinds of things from a variety of different establishments, all sort of located within Camden Center along that strip in Washington.
Rookie Dama Flora. Hi.
Mr. O'Keefe and Mr. Camerano.
You're covering a murder trial. What are you doing?
They then go
How are
to
you?
C.F. McCarthy's, arriving there sometime between 7:30 and 8 p.m. They eventually cajole another friend of theirs, Mr. Kurt Roberts, to come out to the bar and join them as well. And there's some other people that are located within the bar, including Mr. James Sullivan, who we hear from, who was present at the bar that night as well.
So the prosecution has covered the children, the life, the family of the deceased, and
now, John O'Keefe and Karen Reed.
Now he's going through a timeline of what they're going to prove or attempt to prove.
Reconnected sometime around March of 2020, around the time of the COVID-19 sort of pandemic shutdown.
Okay, why are we going
They
there?
started dating around that time period.
What are we doing?
Reconnected during that time period, and the defendant had stayed at the house in Canton several nights a week. She had helped out with the children. In the month or so leading up to,
I mean, to be fair, her side profile is excellent.
the relationship
She looks really good for her age.
You will see text messages,
I think she's
between Mr.
40s, mid 40s.
and Ms.
Looks
Reed,
great.
to
But
that effect.
I don't want to see
You will,
now. I
hear
would like to
testimony
see who's
from
talking,
children,
because this audio
John's
is
niece and
absolute
nephew,
garbage, and
regards
it helps
to,
to see the
things
face of
they
the person who's
observed
talking.
in that
What are we doing?
relationship. And you'll hear testimony from other individuals as far as their observations or things that they heard. Turning to January 29th, 2022. Just after 6 a.m., the Canton Police Department receives a 911 call from a woman reporting a male party, subsequently identified as John O'Keefe, found in the snow outside a residence at 34 Fairview Road.
So if anyone's
At the
unfamiliar,
time,
this
as
is
I
a pool
mentioned,
cam. So
blizzards
this is what
that
they
had
call a
been
pool
predicted was
camera.
occurring. Heavy snow, temperatures in the teens, wind bustling around.
And so
Officers
this
Stephen
is
Saraf and Officer
one,
Stephen
I
Laney, the
believe,
Canton Police were
Court
dispatched
TV
along
who
with Canton
has
Fire and
the
EMS,
rights,
and we'll hear from them
but
in
the
regard to
opportunity
their
to be the
response
pool
to
camera,
what
but
they
it's
observed
usable on all
scene.
platforms. There is
In
no
particular, with Officer Saraf, you'll
copyright to this.
have as an exhibit, anticipates a cruiser
One
camera
person
video from his cruiser.
what to do with the
detailing
camera.
memorializing
There we go.
sort of his response in the darkness, in the blizzard-type conditions, as he's driving from the Canton Police Station, where he was located when he received the call, to 34 Fairview Road. When they arrived there, they observed three individuals, three females, sort of off to the left side of the property. And when I say the left side of the property, I mean if you're standing out in the street facing 34 Fairview Road, off to the left side of the property, there's a flagpole, there's a fire hydrant, there's some bushes. That is where Mr. O'Keefe is located. On the right side of the property is sort of the driveway and the mailbox, other things that you'll become familiar with through photographic evidence and other means, of course, of this trial.
I'll try to keep my
Three females
face
that the officers observed
as
there were then
far
identified
away
as defendant Karen
any
Reed,
other faces as
Mrs.
possible.
Jennifer
But
Cable received a phone call
I feel like they're
early in
going
the
to get a
morning,
little
from the defendant,
move
as well
happy
as
with
Mrs.
this
Terry Roberts,
camera,
who would also
trying to get as
receive a
much
phone
Karen
call
Reed
early
on as
that morning
possible.
from the defendant. The several firefighters from the Canton Fire Department you'll hear from in regard to their observations of injuries, abrasions, and lacerations to the right arm of Mr. O'Keefe. You'll hear their testimony in regard to swelling of his eyes and other injuries that he observed. They observed redness from the cold that he had been lying out in for some time. You'll hear the testimony from these firefighters, Timothy Nuttall, Anthony Flamati, Matthew Kelly, Francis Walsh, Katie McLaughlin, and Greg Woodbury. And at least from three of those firefighters, you'll hear testimony anticipates detailing statements that the defendant made to them when they had asked about the origination of some of those injuries. The defendant stated repeatedly, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. Mr. O'Keefe was then taken from the front lawn onto what they call a scoop stretcher. As he's doing that, I anticipate you'll hear Ms. Roberts' testimony that despite the 6 inches of snow approximately that was on top of Mr. O'Keefe's body and the snow throughout the roadway, front yard, everywhere around where he was, there was grass underneath Mr. O'Keefe, where his cell phone was located underneath his body as he lay on that front lawn. He was then transported by firefighters Kelly, Flamati, and Nuttall, as well as the ambulance being driven by firefighter McLaughlin to the Good Samaritan Medical Center.
It is a
Once
very
there,
interesting note.
there
His
were some
phone was underneath
observations,
his
and
body,
you'll
and it was
testimony
green
from
grass.
Dr.
Well, I don't know
Justin
if it was
Rice,
green grass,
from
but
that
grass
facility, as
underneath
far
him.
as
So
observations
the snow
consistent with what I
fell
anticipate you'll hear from those firefighters.
after he was on the
But
ground,
then there is a certain
allegedly.
warming procedure that they go through trying to bring his body temperature up. Because when Mr. O'Keefe arrives at the Good Samaritan Medical Center, his body temperature is 80.
It's going to be
And
interesting to see how
after
the weather is
those
going to play an
resuscitative
effect in this
efforts proved
trial. That is for
unsuccessful,
sure.
Mr. O'Keefe is
Northeast,
eventually
we had a big
pronounced by
northeaster when this
Dr.
went
Lex at
on,
approximately
went on
7:50.
in 2022, January 2022.
Shortly after that, when the defendant is then being driven away from the scene by Ms. Roberts, who is now going to go pick up Mr. and Mrs. O'Keefe, Jonathan's parents in Braintree, and then bring them to the Samaritan Medical Center in Brockton, the defendant makes some statements of self-harm. As a result of that, she's then transported to the Good Samaritan Medical Center as well by two firefighters named Daniel Whitley and Jason Becker. And amongst the statements that they gained from the defendant as they're having a conversation with her in regard to that, in regard to her treatment and diagnosis, she indicates that the last that she saw Mr. O'Keefe, they had gotten into an argument before he had gotten out of the car in front of Fairview Road. Now, you'll also hear testimony from some of the other first responding officers from the Canton Police Department, including Lieutenant Paul Gallagher, Sergeant Sean Good, and Sergeant Michael Lenk, in regard to their initial response, their observations, people that they spoke to, where they went, and their ability to recover within these blizzard conditions that are still ongoing, certain pieces of evidence that they located in around the area where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found. You'll also hear from Lieutenant Charles Ray of the Canton Police Department, who was tasked with, at this point in time, the Canton Police weren't aware that the nephew was over at sleepover. They weren't aware that Mr. Camerano had come over to the residence on Meadows Ave and picked up the niece, bringing her back to his house as she was left unattended when the defendant left to go looking for Mr. O'Keefe. So unaware of
Something I do want to note, and just a quick pause. I know it doesn't help catching up, but a quick pause is that we cannot forget about the kids in this situation. There are two children, Mr. O'Keefe's, as he's called, as the prosecution is properly referring to the deceased. Mr. O'Keefe was an uncle to two, and the two children lost their mom and then their father as well. And now they lost their guardian uncle. Before, I believe, like 8th grade. So very, very tense, very intense, very sad, tragic occurrences for these children. And I can only imagine that the prosecution is going to keep reminding the jury that he was not just a police officer, but he was also a guardian to two kids who already went through two tragic deaths in their lives at such a young age. So just be prepared for that.
aware of that, they go do a well-being check at approximately 8:22 in the morning. And they also have cruiser camera video attached to their cruiser. You'll see that video and when they pull into the driveway at Meadows Ave, approximately 8:22 in the morning, they pull in directly behind where eventually you'll hear Ms. McCabe left the defendant's vehicle after driving it from her house to Meadows Ave in search of Mr. O'Keefe. And you'll have that footage, and you'll be able to see the back of the defendant's vehicle, specifically the right rear taillight of that. Now, you'll also hear testimony, as I mentioned, from the Cameranos, from Mr. Roberts, from Mr. So. Also, they were all present with the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe at C.F. McCarthy's. You'll hear testimony from a number of other individuals who were at the Waterfall. The Waterfall is a bar located across the street, essentially, from C.F. McCarthy's on Washington Street in Canton Center, and somewhere that Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant went after leaving C.F. McCarthy's at approximately 11 p.m. Now, from that establishment, you'll hear from Rebecca Trayers, who was working as a bartender at the Waterfall that evening. You'll hear from a couple named Nicholas and Karina Polakaitis, who were friends of friends, who had known Mr. O'Keefe through their daughter around the same age as Mr. O'Keefe. Mrs. Polakaitis had some conversation with the defendant that evening, as well as herself and Mrs. McCabe at the Waterfall. She left around the same time as they did. She parked on Washington Street around the same area as Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. Reed did, specifically in Ms. Reed's car. And she observed Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant walking toward the defendant's vehicle, and specifically the defendant walking towards the driver's side. Now, you'll hear testimony from a Christopher and Julie Albert, who were people who were at one point neighbors of Mr. O'Keefe. They knew him well from being neighbors of him. Christopher Albert owns a pizza shop, also located within that Canton Center area. Mr. O'Keefe, earlier in the day of the 28th, had been into that pizza shop along with his nephew to get his nephew a slice. Christopher Albert and Mr. O'Keefe had some conversation regarding what they were doing that night, and it's Christopher Albert who actually texts Mr. O'Keefe and indicates that they're over at the Waterfall and that he should come over shortly before Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant make their way from C.F. McCarthy's home. Now, Christopher Albert left directly from the Waterfall and went home. He was sort of walking distance away from him. His wife, Julie Albert, had left earlier in the evening. There was a band playing at the Waterfall that night. Julie Albert started to get a migraine, and she left before most of the group. Included within that group, and sort of how they came to the Waterfall, the Albert family in particular, Julie Albert went there along with her sister-in-law, Nicole Albert, as well as her niece, Caitlin Albert, her niece's boyfriend, and Mr. Christian Morris, and they had had dinner at the Waterfall earlier in that evening. Now,
This is a lot for.
She has a husband named Brian Albert.
This is a lot for a jury. I will be taking notes.
Had gone with a friend of his, who's also in law enforcement, a man named Brian Higgins. They had gone separately, but had come home together from a funeral for a fallen police officer in New York City. Came home early to sort of beat the weather.
I will be
Eventually, they
taking
meet
notes,
up with
but
Brian
I will
Albert's
be
family
taking
in
notes at the
Warwick.
same time as jury will be taking
Now,
notes if
Tristan
we take
Morris was
notes.
Caitlin Albert's boyfriend.
And note
Had
taking is not
left
allowed during
the
opening
waterfall at some
or
point
closing
in the
statements.
evening. He then returns later to the residence on Fairview Road and picks up Caitlin Albert. Brings her home. All of this is in relation to Brian Albert and Nicole Albert's son, Brian Albert Jr., whose birthday was coming up the following day, the day of the snowstorm on the 29th. So he had been back at the house at 34 Fairview while his family was out at the waterfall. He had a number of friends that had come over that evening to celebrate his birthday with him. Now, among those friends was two individuals named Sarah Levinson and Julie Nagel, and they were at the residence at 34 Fairview for a good portion. Now, those individuals from the waterfall that leave and then come to 34 Fairview, they do so sometime shortly after midnight. Shortly after midnight is when it starts to snow. Flurries are starting to come down. Snow is starting to stick to some degree to roads, to front lawns, grassy areas around town. Now, from that group, the group that goes back is obviously Brian Albert and Nicole Albert as they live there. Caitlin Albert, because it's her parents and her boyfriend is picking her up, as well as Jennifer McCabe, who is Nicole Albert's sister, and her husband, Matthew. They go back to that, and there's an open invitation to essentially anybody that's there. John O'Keefe takes them up. There's certain text messages and phone conversations between John O'Keefe and Jennifer McCabe as to where this house is located, as he's never been there before. And then he and the defendant drive in the defendant's vehicle to 34 Fairview. And once there are several witnesses from within the home that observe the vehicle parked in. So I mentioned earlier, there are two females that were with Brian Albert Jr. at the house, one of them being Julie Nick.
I don't know if focusing is just hard for me right now,
Ryan,
but it feels very much like
he then gets a ride from his friends, Ricky Antonio, as well
when you're
as,
talking to like a younger child and they're like telling you a story. It's hard to follow because you don't know these people
yet. I say
yet.
that because they arrive at
And just like the jury, they don't know these people yet. They're hearing a bunch of things,
coming in from one
bunch of
direction,
things, a bunch of events.
Nagel brother is coming in from another direction. The pickup truck that the Nagel brothers riding in flashes its lights, signaling the defendant to go. She goes first. They follow in behind, and
you can see on this lawyer's face that
they
there's
park the pickup
sort
truck
of like a
somewhere in
sense
that
of
right
like
side of the property,
urgency at the same time. Like I know so much that it's like
different people from within the pickup and different
almost
people
exhausting.
from
Like
the
who's
house
almost exhausted of like
observe
keep
that
saying
Lexus
it, you know?
SUV in one location, pull up a little bit further, and then pull up a little bit further till it's in the area of that fire hydrant, of that flagpole, where Mr. O'Keefe is located the following morning. Now, from their position, I anticipate the testimony that you're going to hear is that Heather Maxson from that pickup truck observes a male passenger and a female operator when the pickup truck operator flashes those lights that the vehicles are facing each other before they pull down. What you'll hear
so each side has about 45 minutes for their opening statements, and
Julie Nagel comes out to the pickup to talk to the brother. Is that
it's
no
hard
one ever
to get the
there are no
picture
footprints around that vehicle.
from 45 minutes and just like I'm just going to tell the story.
Started to snow. Things aren't sticking.
I'm going to tell you the events. I'm going to tell you the people.
Julie Nagel has a conversation with
it can be a little overwhelming.
She's going to stay at the house longer, so the arrangements for a ride home, and the pickup truck leaves from that point. As they pass by, they observe a female operator, matching what I submit as the description of the defendant. From all of those people within that house that evening, none of them at any point in time observed John O'Keefe come into the house. They see the vehicle out front, they see the vehicle pull away, and they just assume that they left and that no one was coming. We hear testimony from other individuals who were at the house that night, including Colin Albert, who is Julie and Christopher Albert's son. He's also the cousin of Brian Albert Jr., who was having people over for his birthday. He's leaving the house around the time that the initial people coming back from the waterfall, which includes the homeowners and Mr. Higgins, are sort of coming into the house. At that point, Colin Albert was leaving. He's getting picked up by a young lady named Allison McCabe, who was Jennifer and Matthew McCabe's daughter, who's also friends with Colin Albert and also cousins of Brian Albert Jr., who's within the home celebrating his birthday. As I mentioned, you'll hear testimony from Matthew McCabe and from Jennifer McCabe in regard to their observations that particular evening, both at the waterfall as well as at the residence on Fairview Road. And then you'll hear testimony in regard to a phone call. A phone call that Jennifer McCabe receives from John O'Keefe's niece at approximately 4:53 in the morning. She answers that phone call, speaks to the niece briefly, and the niece hands the phone over to the defendant. Now, you'll hear testimony from the niece as well, that about 4:30 in the morning or so, the defendant came into her room in a frantic state, saying that Mr. O'Keefe had not come home the night before. So initially, when the defendant is talking to Ms. McCabe, she indicates to Ms. McCabe that the last time she saw Mr. O'Keefe was at the waterfall. Eventually, as Ms. McCabe is waking up, she reminds the defendant that she not only saw them leave the waterfall around the same time as herself, but also saw the vehicle, the defendant's vehicle, outside of the home on Fairview Road. Eventually, the defendant, while driving around, this will come in as far as other testimony and related testimony as it develops. But she's driving around in that morning. She's calling a bunch of number of different people, friends of Mr. O'Keefe. She's calling Mr. O'Keefe himself. She also calls Ms. Roberts. So Terry Roberts receives a call about 5 a.m. from the defendant indicating that Mr. O'Keefe did not come home, indicating that he got hit by the plow or that he must be dead. Ms. Roberts then gets ready. Mr. McCabe is getting ready as they're all sort of planning to go out and look for Mr. O'Keefe to see if they can locate him. They call numerous times. You can see that within the text messages and the phone extractions from a variety of people's different phones throughout the course of this trial as well. So eventually the defendant comes to Ms. McCabe's home, indicates at some points prior to that she has a cracked tailgate. Ms. McCabe then gets in the driver's seat due to the defendant's frantic state. Ms. Roberts is there as well. Ms. Roberts follows Ms. McCabe driving the defendant's vehicle back to Mr. O'Keefe's residence on Meadows Ave, checks on the niece. The defendant then shows both Ms. Roberts and Ms. McCabe the damage to her right rear taillight, which is essentially missing a number of different pieces from that right rear taillight.
Interesting.
They then proceed off to
the taillight and the glass from the taillight is also going to play a big part.
The defendant is insistent that they go to that residence on Fairview Road. Again, they're driving down there in the dark, in the snow, in the wind, in the blizzard. As they approach towards that residence, there's one person. So they're seated within the vehicle. This is Ms. Roberts' vehicle. She's driving. Mrs. McCabe is in the front passenger seat. The defendant is in the rear passenger seat.
I feel like as Northeasterners,
is the only one who sees Mr. O'Keefe. Yells and screams at Ms. Roberts to stop. Ms. Roberts and Ms. McCabe, I anticipate, will testify that they did not see Mr. O'Keefe, not only as they were driving past him, but even after they got out of.
I feel like Northeasterners, like, we will say, oh my gosh, it's a blizzard out there, but like knowing that it's just snowing a little bit. And so when someone uses the term blizzard, like seriously, we know what they're talking about. Like we understand the emphasis of it. Is it a blizzard? Like, are we going to be shut in, or is it just like some snow? Are we getting some snow, or is it a blizzard? Is it coming down inch by inch? By minute, you make a cup of coffee and there's 2 more inches on the ground. Is it blizzard weather? Is it wind? Is there no visibility? So I hope that they're able to clarify. Oh, it was snowing. It was a snowstorm. It was a blizzard. So.
Vehicle until the defendant gets out of the back seat and makes a beeline essentially right over to where Mr. O'Keefe's body is found. Mrs. McCabe then dials 911, and shortly after that is when the officers and the firefighters arrive on scene. Now, while they're waiting there, at approximately 6:23, 6:24 a.m., during a conversation with the defendant asks Mrs. McCabe to look up on her phone how long someone has to be out in the cold to die from hypothermia or something to that effect. And you'll hear some dispute as to when that search was made. And you'll hear testimony from 3 different forensic extraction experts, Nicholas Carino, Ms. Jessica Hyde, and Mr. Ian Whiffen. You'll hear about a lot of these things called extraction reports from cell phones. And the extraction reports are done with a program called Celebrate. Mr. Whiffen is someone who writes that software for Celebrate. I anticipate you'll hear from each of their testimonies that that Google search that was done on Ms. McCabe's phone was done at the same time frame that she indicates the defendant requested her to do it, and that at 6:23 and 6:24 morning.
Interesting.
You'll hear testimony from Ms. Roberts, Ms. McCabe, the firefighters, and the responding.
I'll be interested to see what the defense has to say about the Google search.
Stated while there, asking again and again in regards to Mr. O'Keefe, is he dead? Is he dead? You will also hear testimony, as I indicated, about sort of treatment that she received at the Good Samaritan Medical Center, and that would involve testimony from Ms. Daisy Ormstep, Ms. Kathleen Wilford, and the Dr. Gary Fowler. You'll hear testimony from a number of different analysts from the State Police Crime Lab and from some other laboratories as well. Included within that will be Mr. Nicholas Roberts and Ms. Maureen Hartnett, Mr. Andre Porto, Ms. Ashley Vallier, and Ms. Christina Hand, those all being from the State Police Lab. You will hear testimony in regard to an incident which occurred earlier in January, right around New Year's. Mr. O'Keefe, the defendant, and the children have been invited with a much larger group, approximately 70 people or so, to spend New Year's in Aruba. This is a trip that was organized by a friend of Mr. O'Keefe's named Laura Sullivan. We'll hear a testimony from her, as well as from her sister, Miss Marietta Sullivan, as well as you'll hear testimony from the 2 children in relation to this. And essentially, day 2 or so of this trip, Marietta Sullivan, the sister of Laura, is walking through the lobby and she runs into Mr. O'Keefe. This is someone she refers to as Godfather, because John O'Keefe is also the godfather of Laura Sullivan's son. Runs into him in the lobby, gives him a hug, and is sort of pointing him in the direction of where she believes he's going into his room. The defendant is in the area. The defendant starts yelling and screaming and swearing at Ms. Sullivan. Ms. Sullivan responds in kind. Essentially, for the most part, the Sullivan sisters see very little of Mr. O'Keefe throughout the remainder of their trip to Aruba. And we also hear testimony from the children that shortly after this, or immediately after this, there is an approximately 20-minute screaming match going on between Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant within their hotel room in front of the children. Now, you'll also hear testimony from the defendant's phone in regard to, and from another individual's phone in regard to that Aruba, in regard to text messages of an amorous nature that she had with Mr. Brian Higgins, who was at the waterfall, and also at the residence on 34 Fairview, because he was friends with the homeowner, Brian Albert, but he was also friends with Mr. O'Keefe and had also met the defendant. And throughout the course of those amorous text messages, there's references that the defendant makes to that incident in Aruba, as she purports it to be Mr. O'Keefe cheating on her. She insists that he was making out with Marietta Sullivan in that lobby as opposed to her giving him a hug. And makes repeated reference to that within the contents of those text messages as well. Now, you'll hear testimony from a number of different other individuals, Mr. Michael Trotta, who has a supervisory role at the Canton Department of Public Works. You'll hear from Mr. Louis Jutras, who has a supervisory role with regard to IT, in regard to certain video that was recovered from the town of Canton, as well as from a temple located along the route that the defendant traveled, both away from Fairview that evening, as well as to Fairview from the waterfall, away from Fairview to Mr. O'Keefe's residence on Meadows, and then later in the morning at 5 because if you recall, Mr. McCabe, I anticipate, would testify that she receives the call from the defendant about 4:53 in the morning. The defendant then drives around Canton for some perceptible half-hour or so period of time prior to even getting to Ms. McCabe's. And what I submit the evidence, or what I anticipate the evidence will show based on sort of the tracking of the phone records, testimony you'll hear from Lieutenant Brian Tully of the state police from these bulky records and RTT accounts, that the defendant, while she's using her phone, is driving in the direction of Fairview Road prior to going to Mrs. McCabe's house, where she meets Mrs. McCabe and Ms. Roberts. Now, again, you'll hear testimony from a number of different troopers who were involved in the investigation. With regard to this case, you'll hear from Trooper Michael Proctor and Sergeant Yuri Mechanic of the State Police. You'll hear from Lieutenant Brian Tully. You'll hear some testimony
So
from
many
Trooper
names.
Joseph Hall,
So many names.
specialized unit within the State Police called
The witness list for both sides is close to
an
300.
analysis and reconstruction
each.
section.
Yes, there'll
within
be
the
crossover.
Massachusetts State Police. His
There's
examination
so
of the
many
vehicle,
possible
his
witnesses
examination of
to
the
be
scene,
called.
his examination of specifically
So
some
many.
Toyota Texture, because Lexus is essentially owned by Toyota or vice versa. So there is some data that he's able to recover from that and back the vehicle up based on its known locations and travel, key cycles, and essentially opines, anticipate he'll opine that around 12:45 in the morning, when the vehicle was in front of the residence on Fairview, that for some perceptible period of time, that vehicle travels over 60 feet in reverse at over approximately 24.2 miles per hour. Now, you'll hear testimony, as I
data.
said, from a number of
Your car
different
knows everything.
troopers, as well as from
It
a
has a
number of
computer
different
in it.
analysts from different labs. Included within that is Ms. Maureen Hartnett, who collected items from the vehicle, the defendant's vehicle, including the taillights, sort of housing from that vehicle, pieces of the taillight that were discovered in sort of front grass, front street area. There is a specialized team called the CERT team. You'll hear from Lieutenant Kevin O'Hara, who has a supervisory role in relation to that. And then later on that day of the 29th, he, along with Lieutenant Tully and a number of different members from his CERT team, were searching for evidence within the mounds of snow in front of that house. As the blizzard is
taillight
still
again.
ongoing at this point.
It's going to be an important piece of evidence.
Among the items that they located,
How it got there,
is a
when it
sneaker.
got there.
Mr. O'Keefe is transported to the hospital. He's found to only have one sneaker on his feet. They find the other sneaker in that area of the body. They find various pieces of taillight. And as is wont to do, over the course of the following days, the temperatures rise, rainstorm that comes in, and the snow melts. Over those successive days, there are additional pieces of taillights that are eventually discovered in that area of the front lawn of the street. Now, from these different pieces, Ms. Hartnett also locates a cocktail glass that's located on the bumper or the rear area of that scene, and she locates a human hair on the back of that defendant's vehicle as well. Now, the cocktail glass on the bumper, you'll also see surveillance video from the waterfall, and Mr. O'Keefe is observed on that surveillance video essentially walking out of the waterfall with a cocktail glass in his right hand. Same right hand that has minor injuries to it, and the same right hand that's attached to his right arm that has the abrasions and lacerations that are observed by the paramedics, that are observed by the doctors at Good Samaritan, and are observed by the medical examiner as well. You'll hear testimony from another analyst, Christina Hanley, about the forensic consistency between a drinking glass that was in the defendant's bumper and the drinking glass pieces that were found on scene in 34 Fairview. You'll hear her testimony in regard to pieces of red and clear plastic that were microscopic in size that were found within Mr. O'Keefe's clothing. Consistent, in her opinion, I anticipate she'll testify with the same pieces of plastic contained within the defendant's taillight. You'll hear from an Ashley Valley, who works for the lab as well, and how she fit the various pieces of broken taillight from the scene together and over that taillight housing, finding them to be consistent with each other as well. You'll hear testimony from Andre Porto, who does essentially DNA analyst for the lab. And samples that were DNA samples that were taken from the taillight, from the clothes of Mr. O'Keefe, and the broken drinking glass that were consistent with Mr. O'Keefe. Those items were also sent, the taillight pieces, taillight DNA was also sent to the independent lab, Bodie Technologies, located in Northern Virginia. And you'll hear from an analyst there, Mr. Nicholas Bradford, indicating that the DNA on the defendant's taillight, in his opinion, is consistent with that of Mr. O'Keefe and inconsistent with Trooper Proctor and Sergeant Mechanic, who were the two preliminary investigators and primary investigators when it came to this case. You'll also hear from this test chart from that Bodie Laboratories in regard to some mitochondrial DNA that she examined in regard to that hair that Ms. Hartnett found on the Buffalo car, and her opinion that it was consistent with that of Mr. O'Keefe as well. Lastly, you'll also hear from Dr. Irene Sportibello and Dr. Renee Stonebridge of the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in regard to their various examinations. Dr. Stonebridge is a neuropathologist. She essentially examines brain findings. Dr. Irene Sportibello is a forensic pathologist who does the sort of autopsy and medical examination of Mr. O'Keefe's body. You'll hear about the variety of sort of injuries that she observed over Mr. O'Keefe's body from him. In particular, you'll hear testimony in regard to lacerations to the right back of the scene. You'll hear testimony in regard to an initial sort of skull fracture that occurs to the back of his head, and then sort of a radiating skull fracture that goes throughout his skull, which then leads to a subdural hemorrhage, or essentially bleeding on the brain and then swelling of the brain, which then causes a condition called ecchymosis, which then sort of leads to the swelling of both of Mr. O'Keefe's eyes that was observed by the initial response. You will hear various testimony about sort of issues in regard to his pancreas, how that's indicative of hypothermia. Now, again, as I said, this is the first of 2 times that I have an opportunity to address you directly. And I thank you very much for your attention today, and I thank you for the participation of your close attention as we go through all of the witnesses and all the evidence in this case. That second time that I do get to address you, what I'll be asking you, based on the evidence, and again, as the board has instructed you, you are the sole arbiters of the facts of this case. You are the ones who find what the facts, I reiterate that, facts, and what the evidence demonstrates in this case. What I submit to you at that time, that second time, is that the only true and just verdict based on that is that the defendant, Karen Reed, is guilty of murder in the second degree, striking the victim, Mr. O'Keefe, with her car, knocking him back onto the ground, striking his head on the ground, causing the bleeding in his brain, swelling, and then leaving him there for several hours in a blizzard, with temperatures in the teens, wind swirling around, snow piling up on his body until she comes with Mrs. McCabe and Mrs. Roberts just after 6 a.m. And that she is also guilty of vehicular manslaughter, operating under the influence of liquor, and that she is also guilty of leaving the scene after causing death. Thank you very much for your time.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lally. Mr. Chatty?
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court.
Okay, so prosecution opening statements, summation. Karen did it. She got drunk. She hit him with the car. She drove away, let him just die in the snow. Then played, oh no, what happened the next morning? Lot of people, lot of names, a lot of straight up just if I was a juror, which I am playing a juror, the Chatty Juror, if I was sitting there, my brain would be swirling, trying to keep track of every name that he said, what their profession is, who they are, who they're related to. But remember, this is an 8-week trial. We are going to get there. This is like the first paragraph of the 10-page paper you had to write. You know, you're telling everyone what's happening and what's going to happen. It can be a little daunting at first, but hopefully the prosecution is able to break it down in a easily notable, rememberable timeline for the jury to get their case out. Hopefully they're able to not just continue to like confuse people and it's like, oh, well, this happened, but also this happened. If we go back, a year ago, and then, hopefully they do it in a way where it's point A to point B, because I feel like that's just easier to consume. It all kind of depends on witness availability and all that stuff. Because you can't just hold someone's life up for weeks at a time. So hopefully it's able to be kind of boom, boom, 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, and we'll get there. if I was on the jury, that's very much what I would like. It's easier to take notes. It's easier to kind of go back in your brain, and you're just kind of adding on more information. So up next, we have the defense opening statements. The accent is going to be a little bit different because a lot of the lawyers on the defense team are not Massachusetts born and raised folks. So their accents are going to be the accents are I'm in love with. I love it. So let's get Boot Scoot and Boogie in to the defense opening statements. Oh, the tightness! Look at how he's got to like move chair. He can't just like walk. Oh, it's so small and so tight in that courtroom.
Karen Reed was framed.
Oh.
Her car never struck John O'Keefe.
All right. We're just jumping in. With it. Okay, this is big. This is poignant. This is just sharp. We're just jumping in. The defense does not have to prove someone else did the crime. The defense just needs to poke little holes into the prosecution and develop reasonable doubt. If there is reasonable doubt that Karen did the crime, she cannot be found guilty. Them's the rules. So the defense has to not disprove everything, but just energize the fact that it can be disproved. So it's not like, well, she didn't do it, but this person did, and we have evidence that they did. It's just she didn't do it, and here's a couple of things of what, okay, well, that doesn't make sense now, does it? Type of energy. It's like, okay, and so this is going to be very interesting. So much energy, such different energy. Wow, this is crazy.
She did not cause his death. That means that somebody else did.
All right.
You will learn that it was no accident that John O'Keefe was found dead on the front lawn of 34 Fairview Road in Kent on January 29th, 2022. Okay. You will learn that at that address lived a well-known and well-connected law enforcement family in Kent, the Alberts. Because the Alberts were involved,
Ooh.
And because they had close connections to the investigators in this case, Karen Reed was framed for a murder she did not commit.
It is true. They were closely connected.
Ladies and gentlemen, as I previously told you, my name is David Yannetti. I'm an attorney with an office in Boston. Together with attorneys Alan Jackson and Elizabeth Little, it's truly my privilege and my honor to represent Karen Reed during this trial. From a very early juncture in this case, you will question the Commonwealth's theory of the case. You will question the quality of the Commonwealth's evidence. You will question the veracity of the Commonwealth's witnesses. And you will question their shoddy and biased investigation, a faulty investigation that led to Karen Reed sitting here today. You will learn, in short, that the police did no real investigation of this case, and you will question why. You'll question why the investigators had such tunnel vision.
Why tunnel vision?
You'll question why they focused solely on Karen Reed.
He's telling the jury what they will be questioning,
as opposed to the well-known and well-connected Albert family of Kent, family that was never treated as suspects by the investigators in this case. Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found mortally injured on Brian Albert's front lawn.
Yeah,
his body was in full view and almost right below Brian Albert's bedroom window on his front lawn. He was found.
I can't take notes. I want to take notes.
You'll learn that Brian Albert was a Boston police officer as well, and that he was a trained first responder. Brian Albert was notified that another police officer was injured and unresponsive on his front lawn, and Brian Albert did nothing. His sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, and other civilians were on his property that morning after John O'Keefe's body was found. Police, EMTs, firefighters, police cruisers, and an ambulance, fire truck, lights flashing, and first responder Brian Albert never came out of his house.
He never came out.
Equally important for you will be the fact that the lead homicide investigators never went inside the Albert home that night. You'll learn that Brian Albert's brother, Kevin Albert, is a Canton police officer. It was obvious very early on
The
that
tree,
Canton
the branches
police
of this
should not
tree.
be investigating the death of a man found on the property of the brother of a Canton police officer. So it was decided just about from the start that the Massachusetts State Police should take complete control of this investigation because the Canton police were conflicted out. Now, that sounded good at the time, but you'll learn that two major problems arose. First, despite the fact that they obviously had a conflict of interest, the evidence will show that the Canton police still had their hands in this investigation. You will find it astounding. But Canton police officer Kevin Albert, the reason for the conflict of interest in the first place, was continually updated about the status of this investigation while it was going on. Second, and equally troubling, is that the lead state police detective who was assigned to this case was a man named Michael Proctor.
Okay.
Michael Proctor, you will learn, is one of the many people in Canton with deep ties to the Albert family.
Okay.
Michael Proctor's
The
own
ties
mother
run deep.
refers to the Alberts as the Proctor's second family.
Oh.
His own sister's wedding, Michael Proctor was in the wedding party with Colin Albert.
He is
And
gripping.
he sat at the head table of that wedding with members of the Albert family.
David Yannetti is
That's the
gripping.
man who was chosen to lead the investigation into the suspicious death on the property of Brian Albert. That's the man who gave updates to Canton police officer Kevin Albert, while the state police were supposed to be investigating what had occurred at his brother Brian Albert's house. You'll learn that right from the jump, Michael Proctor predetermined the outcome of this case. Never stepped foot inside the Albert home on January 29th, 2022. Never checked out whether there were any signs of struggle inside that home. He never called for crime scene technicians and other specialists to look for blood or other trace evidence within the home. He never asked Brian Albert for permission to go in the home and take a look around. Michael Proctor never applied for a search warrant to go in that home.
No search
Instead,
warrant for the home.
he focused immediately and
Where
exclusively
was
on
found
Karen
in the yard.
Reed, the outsider. You will learn
Wow.
that no one in the Proctor family has ever called the Reed family their second family. No one in the Proctor family had been in a wedding party with anyone from the Reed family.
They're connected.
Karen
They are
Reed
connected.
was a convenient outsider. She was most definitely not from Canton. So how did Michael Proctor feel about her?
You're not from
How did he
here.
treat somebody he was investigating at a point in time when he should have been keeping an open mind, focusing on obtaining all possible evidence so that he didn't miss anything?
Wow.
Well, you will learn that on the very day that John O'Keefe was found dead on Brian Albert's lawn, Michael Proctor was texting with his high school buddies about this supposedly secret investigation using his personal cell phone. He was revealing information about this investigation to his friends, assuming that nobody would ever find out what he was doing or what he was saying. And he was revealing his true thoughts about Karen Reed to his friends, not what he put in his sanitized police reports, his true feelings to his friends whom he trusted, and in text messages that he never thought would come into the hands of the defense in this case.
Yeah.
Lead
Okay.
investigator, Trooper Michael Proctor, right from the start, called Karen Reed names you would reserve only for your worst enemies. He told his friends that he hoped that she would kill herself.
It may not be illegal, but it's not a good look.
He told his friends that he had seized her cell phone. And you will learn that he knew he shouldn't have been accessing any content on her cell phone because he knew there would likely be attorney-client communications on between Karen and me at that time. He knew that he was supposed to wait for a search warrant or other permission from a judge in order to go through that phone. But you'll learn that he went through the phone anyway, without permission. And you'll know that he did because he told his high school buddies that he was searching her phone for nude photos of Karen Reed. And he was disappointed he hadn't found any yet.
Okay.
That
I'm gonna need
the
more information on
professional
that.
and unbiased investigator who was chosen to lead the investigation into the death of John O'Keefe. You'll learn that one of Michael Proctor's high school friends commented to him that with a dead body on the front lawn, the homeowner in this case is surely going to catch a lot of grief. And do you know what Michael Proctor's response to that was?
Yeah.
One word. Nope. And he explained why. Michael Proctor assured his buddies that the homeowner would not catch a lot of grief because, quote, the homeowner's a Boston cop too, end quote.
Prime in the
That
back.
one sentence,
Someone's
ladies and
drinking
gentlemen, in Michael Proctor's own words,
Not the
will
forever
explain a lot
chemicals.
to you about how this investigation was conducted. You will be able to evaluate whether Trooper Michael Proctor treated Brian Albert and his family differently
I'm
because of who
enthralled
they
right
are
now.
and their relationships between his family and theirs. You will evaluate whether this investigation was on the up and up. You will decide, as a result, how valuable or worthless the prosecution's DNA evidence is or is not, in light of who controlled that evidence. You will learn that Michael Proctor's fingerprints are figuratively all over this case. His fingerprints are
Like
all
already
over
tainting the
Commonwealth's evidence.
believability, the
You will learn that Michael Proctor showed up
prosecutorial
at Karen
truth,
Reed's
you know.
parents' house in Dayton
Incredible.
to interview her during the afternoon of January 29th.
He's got great timing, he's got a great voice, he's got great energy. So
was found dead on Brian Albert's front lawn.
he was the right choice
You'll
for
learn that Michael
opening
Proctor
statements,
had
for
her
sure.
Lexus SUV towed from her parents' home. But you'll also learn that he wrote a search warrant in which he falsified the time that he took that SUV. He swore under oath that the vehicle wasn't towed until 5:30 p.m. But you'll learn that we obtained surveillance footage that he didn't know we would get. And that surveillance footage
Not the
exposed
CC.
that Michael Proctor's words in that sworn affidavit were a lie. Michael Proctor had that vehicle for about 90 minutes before
Liar.
he claimed to have taken. And folks, you will learn that the timing is important, very important. Because when John O'Keefe was first found on Brian Albert's front lawn, the police thoroughly searched that yard for potential evidence. And it wasn't just one officer, or two, or three. There were at
Okay.
least 4 officers that searched that front lawn.
Four
And that morning
officers.
was the beginning of a snowstorm, but there wasn't yet much snow on the ground when they were searching that lawn.
He
It
said
was
snowstorm,
light
not
out
blizzard.
by the time they did the search, and it was getting lighter.
Very different.
And during that
When it
thorough
comes to
search of Brian
snow in
Albert's
the
front
Northeast.
lawn, the number of pieces of tail light that were found by a minimum of 4 officers looking for evidence was 0. It was
No.
only later in the day when the snow was really starting to
Tail light
accumulate
last
that
time.
the police miraculously started
Don't
to
give me
find
her.
pieces of tail light on the property.
Of course she's
The police
looking
only
this because
started
she's
to
going
find
to watch
pieces of
her
tail
lawyer
light
talk.
after Michael Proctor had seized Karen Reed's car. They only started to find pieces of tail light after Michael Proctor had possession of her taillight. You'll learn that Trooper Michael Proctor then kept going back to the Albert residence.
Go back
After
to the
that
lawyer.
day, he
I wanna
claims to
see
have
it.
kept finding pieces of taillight on multiple occasions on multiple different days.
Okay, multiple
In
different
addition,
days.
A good week after John O'Keefe's death, Canton Police Chief Kenneth Berkowitz, an older officer on the brink of retirement with probably not the best eyesight.
Oh, calling out your eyesight. You're old and you're
Someone-
blind.
He supposedly was driving, happened to be driving past Brian Albert's house. And by the way, Brian Albert is someone with whom Chief Berkowitz is also good friends. And this older
It's
man
still
allegedly spotted
connecting
yet
all the
another
connect-
piece
like,
of taillight
They
from
are
his
all
moving vehicle.
intertwined.
This
so
was yet
closely
another
together.
piece of taillight that was somehow missed by the trained specialists who had previously and thoroughly searched the property.
Okay.
Another piece of taillight that Proctor supposedly missed in the many times he went back to the property.
So magic taillight.
And Michael Proctor claims that he kept finding pieces of taillight right up until February 18th of 2022, which was nearly 3 weeks after John O'Keefe was found dead on Brian Albert's.
Okay. I
You
will
will
be
learn that there
interested to
is no
see
competent
the
evidence
details on
that
that.
Karen Reed's taillight shattered at Brian Albert's property in the early morning hours of January 29th of 2022. To the contrary, you'll learn that when Karen left John at Brian Albert's house, she drove back to John's house on Meadows Ave across town in Canton.
Okay.
At John's home, where he lived with his 2 adopted children, Karen was drifting in and out of sleep, but she woke up for good in a panic sometime around 4 a.m. because John hadn't come home.
Right.
That was
She was
not
like,
like
she
him
was
at all.
drinking. That's like for sure.
She
She
had
was
never done
drinking.
that before. Karen had a sinking feeling that something was wrong. Something was seriously wrong.
Could have been
So
the
she
drink.
got back into her Lexus. She backed up out of the garage to leave the driveway. And when she did, the right rear taillight of her Lexus struck John's parked vehicle in the driveway and her taillight cracked. That was the same taillight that the prosecution now claims was broken outside the Albert residence hours earlier at 12:30 a.m. But we have video evidence that the taillight was actually broken at 5 a.m., many hours after the prosecution needs that taillight to have been broken.
Show me the
There is,
video.
of course,
Let's see it.
no video of the taillight being broken at Brian Albert's house. You will eventually conclude that that's because the taillight was not broken there.
Because it wasn't broken.
Importantly,
Okay.
you will learn that there was an eyewitness who arrived at 34 Fairview after Karen got there with John O'Keefe in the early morning hours of January 29th. And that eyewitness, Brian Nagel, who's the brother of Julie Nagel, who was at the after-hours party that night.
Okay.
He had a clear view of Karen's SUV. Brian Nagel confirms that there was no damage to her taillight at that time. Karen was sitting in the driver's seat with her hands at 10 and 2. And Ryan Nagel confirms that while Karen was inside the car, John O'Keefe was not. John O'Keefe was also not outside the car at that time. You will ultimately conclude there's only one other place he could have been. Now, going back to that 5 a.m. video from John's driveway, you will see Karen back up her Lexus and strike John's car at about 5 a.m. when she was leaving John's house to go out to look for him. And you will know that she struck his car at 5 a.m. because you will watch that video closely. You will witness that the wheels and the hubcaps on John's car are jostled and moved by Karen's SUV. And you will conclude that that video depicts exactly when Karen's taillight was cracked, long after she dropped off John that night at 34 Fairview.
Okay. So
And you will learn that part of the reason that Karen's Lexus
He's
hit
saying-
John's car was that Karen was panicked at that time.
that she didn't
Where
hit him.
is John?
The
Why
taillight
didn't he
didn't
come
break
home? What
at that
happened to
house
him?
where he was found
And you will
deceased.
learn that she was
It
racking
broke-
her brain for what
Hitting John's
possibly
car
could
when
have
she woke
happened.
up the next morning, fall
Like
freaked
many
out
of
like,
us.
where is he?
Was worried about the worst. Did I hit him? Could I have hit him? That was what she was saying, both to herself and to other people later that morning when she went back to 34 Fairview.
There have been
Couldn't think
claims
of
that she
anything
was
else
saying,
that made
I hit
sense.
him. So hopefully
He
there is
certainly didn't
some
consider in a million
footage
years
that we see.
someone from within the Albert home could have beaten up John and left him to die on the front lawn.
Someone could have done
Now,
that. Yes. I
That
think
was
that is a
over 2 years ago.
possibility.
Karen didn't know then what you will learn during this trial. Karen didn't know that Brian Albert's sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, left the after-hours party at Brian Albert's house sometime after Karen pulled away. She didn't know that after Jennifer McCabe dropped off some people elsewhere, she returned to her own home. Karen didn't know that Jennifer McCabe climbed some stairs in her home and eventually made it into her bedroom with her cell phone. Karen didn't know that Jennifer McCabe settled in at 2:27 in the morning on January 29, 2022, and typed a Google search that she would later delete. 2:27 in the morning was over
Google
3 hours before John
search.
O'Keefe's body was found on Brian Albert's lawn.
That we will have lots
2:27 was over
of
3 hours before anyone knew or
technical
suspected that
professionals
John O'Keefe was missing or hurt
conversing
or in trouble.
about here.
And at 2:27 in the morning, you will learn that with no one watching her, thinking she was alone with her thoughts, not worrying that anyone would know what she was doing, Jennifer McCabe typed in the following Google search: how long to die in the cold? Now, she misspelled the first word, so the actual search was how long to die in the cold, but you'll get the point.
Look, it was
yourself,
late or early.
Why would somebody Google how long
happens all
does
the
it take
time.
for someone to die in the cold? Unless
Google knows what
that
you're talking
person
about.
knew someone who either was in that situation or would be in that situation.
Okay.
You will question during this trial, who was it who actually did die in the cold at some point that night? Sometime
They made it
after
clear
Jen
that that
McCabe was asking Google
wasn't
for
the
an
time
answer
that it
to
was
her
searched,
question.
and they'll
And
probably
you'll
talk
learn that
about
the
it,
answer to that
how it was
question
a tab
was John
that was
O'Keefe.
open at that time, and she searched
The
it
medical
later.
examiner in this case will testify that one of the causes of John O'Keefe's death was hypothermia. John O'Keefe died in part because he was left to die in the cold. Now, the Commonwealth will try to dispute the timing of that Google search. They'll try to claim that there were only 2 Google searches at 6:23 and 6:24 a.m. after John's body was found.
Right.
But one problem for the Commonwealth will be that we have retained Richard Green, one of the leading computer forensic experts in the country. Rick Green has forensically analyzed Jennifer McCabe's phone, both manually and using every appropriate type of computer software to solve this issue. Rick Green will confirm for you that Jennifer McCabe did indeed make that search at 2:27 a.m. And
I am
another
open.
problem for the Commonwealth
I'm open to hearing
is that you will
all
hear and
arguments
see
on
other
when this
evidence
Google search was made.
that will confirm that Jennifer McCabe is lying when she denies making that Google search at 2:27 a.m. You will conclude that before she went to bed, if she went to bed that night, Jennifer McCabe wanted to know just how long it would take for someone to die in the cold. And a big question in this trial for you will be, when was John O'Keefe left to die in the cold? I expect the Commonwealth will try to persuade you that he was left there sometime around 12:30 a.m. because they're going to try to prove to you that Karen Reed hit him and that his body stayed there the entire night until first responders arrived at 6 a.m. and his body was taken to the hospital. But you will learn that there are big problems with the Commonwealth's theory of this case. You will learn that there were 6 people at that after-hours party at Brian Albert's house, all of whom left by the front door and would have been confronted by John O'Keefe's lifeless body on that lawn if he was actually there at that time. Those 6 people walked out the front door to 34 Fairview, walked to their cars, either in the driveway or parked in front of the house. Brian Albert's sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, was there. Her husband, Matthew McCabe, was there.
That's a good point.
ATF federal agent Brian Higgins was there, who was also Brian Albert's friend. Sarah Levinson, a friend of Brian Albert Jr., was there. Julie Nagel, another friend of Brian Albert Jr., was there. And Caitlin Albert, Brian Albert's daughter, was also there. All of them leaving the residence. Each of those people left 34 Fairview in Canton, where Brian Albert lived. Each of them walked out facing the front lawn, where the Commonwealth will tell you that a 6'2", nearly 220-pound big man in dark clothing was sprawled on the front lawn when there was only a dusting of white snow on the ground. He was supposedly sprawled on that lawn, just feet from where these people were walking when they left the residence.
Snow at that
and you
time.
will learn that not one of these people saw John O'Keefe Lane. Not one. And you know who else saw Nolan Lane outside in the early morning hours of January 29th? The snowplow driver in charge of plowing the street for the city of Canton. And this is another big problem for the Commonwealth.
He's giving
You will
the
learn that
questions
Michael
to ask
Proctor,
to the jury.
is that name again,
I love it.
wrote a report where he claimed that the DPW supervisor
Getting in their
had
brains. There's
told him
already
that
reasonable
Fairview
doubt.
Road
We haven't
had
even
not
given you
been
any
plowed that
evidence,
night.
and there's already reasonable doubt.
Proctor's total investigation on this issue consisted of one phone
And I'm
call
going to prove
and
to you
no
that the
follow-up.
reasonable doubt is reasonable.
He just submitted his report that simply said the road hadn't been plowed that night, and perhaps thinking that no one else would follow up either. But you'll learn that when it came to finding out the truth, it's not that Proctor couldn't find the truth, it's that he wouldn't.
It's very clear.
Unfortunately, you'll learn that
to.
we would,
Very clear.
and we did. You'll learn that
I think
within
his
weeks
speed
after
is good.
January 29th, we sent our investigator, a former Medford police officer named Paul Makowski, to the Canton DPW to try to get to the bottom of this. Paul Makowski talked to the same supervisor at the DPW, a man named Michael Trotta, whom Proctor claimed had told him that the street hadn't been plowed that night. You'll learn that Paul Makowski found out that Michael Proctor was not telling the truth. You'll learn that Michael Trotta from the DPW told Paul Makowski, our investigator, that the street was indeed plowed that night, and that the name of the plow driver was Brian Laughlin. So Paul Makowski tracked down Brian Laughlin. He asked Mr. Laughlin if the state police or any investigators had ever spoken to him. And the answer came back, no. You will then learn what Brian Laughlin had to say about what he saw and didn't see that night, and you will be shocked. Brian Laughlin told Paul Makowski that he was driving a big snowplow in Canton that night. You'll learn that the nickname for it at the DPW was Frankenstein, because it had a lot of spare parts and it had been around forever. Brian Laughlin told Paul Makowski that when he plows the streets of Canton in Frankenstein, he's very careful. He makes sure to check not only the roads in front of him, but also the yards to the side of his plow. He makes sure not to hit a fire hydrant or a tree or an animal, or heaven forbid, a person lying in the snow. He's always on the lookout. You'll learn that Brian Laughlin passed by 34 Fairview in his plow, traveling right by Brian Albert's front lawn at 2:30 in the morning. You'll learn that Brian Laughlin confirms that at about 2:30, when he went by that house, John O'Keefe was not on that front lawn. So you'll learn that about 2 hours after the Commonwealth claims that Karen Reed somehow incapacitated John O'Keefe, an eyewitness confirms that not only could it not have happened, but it didn't happen. But you'll learn that Brian Laughlin also provides some other troubling testimony for the Commonwealth. You'll learn that after making that pass at 2:30 in the morning and seeing no body, he showed up again at the entrance to Fairview Road, intending to make another pass down it with his plow.
Okay.
This time, however, at about 3:30 in the morning, he looked down the street and he saw that parked right next to Brian Albert's front lawn, right in the very area where John O'Keefe's body was later found at 6 a.m., Brian Laughlin saw a Ford Edge parked on the side of the road. You will learn that the police have done zero investigation to discover whose Ford Edge that was. You'll learn that members of the Albert family drove Ford Edges. You'll learn that the police to this day claim not to know who was parked right next to the area where
we
John
just got
O'Keefe's
back
body
into him. He
later
was just
found. You'll
dropping
learn
some more
that
bombshells
while
on us.
investigators on this case, including Michael Proctor, completely ignored the snowplow driver who went right by the Albert residence, the defense not only tracked him down and interviewed him, but the plow driver actually took our investigator on a ride back past the residence to explain the precise route that he had taken on January 29th. You'll learn that some other curious things were going on in the early morning hours of January 29th. Curious things that the police in this case utterly failed to investigate. For example, after people left the after-hours party at Brian Albert's house on January 29, Brian Albert claimed that he had no contact with anyone but his wife until he was woken up in the morning. But you will learn that he was ultimately confronted by the fact that his phone records revealed that he had actually placed a phone call to ATF agent Brian Higgins, his friend, the same friend who had been at his house earlier that night. And that was at 2:22 in the morning. You'll learn that Brian Higgins called him back 17 seconds later, and they connected for 22 seconds on their cell phones. You'll be asked to consider just how long 22 seconds is and what could be said and discussed during that long of a phone call. You will consider that phone call in the context of the other curious things that were going on during the early morning hours of January 29th. You will learn about the following in chronological order. 2:12 a.m., Jennifer McCabe arrives at her home. 2:22 a.m., Brian Albert calls Brian Higgins. 2:22 a.m., 17 seconds later, Higgins calls him back. And Brian Albert and Brian Higgins are on the phone together for 22 seconds. 2:23 a.m., Jennifer McCabe climbs the stairs to her bedroom. 2:27 a.m., Jennifer McCabe searches on Google, how long to die in the cold. 2:30 a.m., plow driver Brian Laughlin confirms there was no body on Brian Albert's front lawn. 3:30 a.m., Brian Laughlin confirms that a Ford Edge was parked right where John O'Keefe's body was later found. The Commonwealth will not be able to successfully dispute any of those facts, yet I expect that they will persist in asking you to convict Karen Reed anyway. You will learn that there are other major problems with the Commonwealth's theory. You'll learn that when John O'Keefe was found, he did not look like he had been hit by a car. You'll learn that he looked to have been attacked and beaten up. You'll learn that John O'Keefe was a large 6'2" man who, if positioned behind a Lexus SUV, would have had his torso completely exposed to the rear of that vehicle, including to the taillight.
Okay.
You'll learn that no part of his torso was injured. There was no bruising, no ridges, no scratches, no punctures.
It was kind of interesting.
You'll learn that his chest and hips and legs were pristine.
Getting more details about this, I mean, it's going to be tough to hear and go through. But
the evidence will show that what was not
a lot of this evidence is going to be really important to fully understand both sides here.
And you will conclude that a car did not.
As I'm sure they will both sides will have
the injuries to John
brilliant arguments as to concerning the injuries on O'Keefe.
As though an animal had attacked his arm. But
this is going to be a big topic too. There is allegedly a dog bite. There's been talk about a German Shepherd from the house that has been rehomed.
Who is world renowned, who has personally conducted thousands of autopsies. And he will testify that those marks are consistent with scratch and claw marks and bite marks from an animal, including a German Shepherd. You'll learn that on January 29th of 2022, Brian Albert's family dog, Chloe, was a German Shepherd. You'll learn that Brian Albert has admitted that this dog is not good around strangers. You'll learn that on January 29th of 2022, John O'Keefe would have been a stranger to that dog. And you'll learn that Chloe had been the beloved family dog for the Alberts for 7 years.
7 years.
The Albert family loved Chloe. But strangely, as we discuss this dog today, the Albert family doesn't have its beloved Chloe anymore. You'll learn that Brian Albert was called to testify before the grand jury regarding this matter in April of 2022, and that he did testify about his German Shepherd, Chloe, during that grand jury testimony. And you'll learn that not long after that testimony, Brian Albert and his family rehomed.
Oh,
their
not the
beloved
air
family
quotes.
dog.
Not the air
They
quotes.
gave away the family dog. And Chloe, the German Shepherd, is therefore now gone. Now,
Where is
the
Chloe?
Commonwealth will try
What
to
is
take
Chloe?
your
Okay, is
attention
Chloe? How
away
healthy is
from all of
Chloe?
these troubling
Where is
facts and
Chloe?
try to
I need
persuade
a
you not to
to
consider
date
their
update
shocking lack
on
of
Chloe.
investigation of anyone else, not to consider John O'Keefe's injuries, not to consider the fact that multiple people left the residence and saw no body, not to consider the fact that the snowplow driver was specifically looking at 2:30 a.m. and there was nobody there, not to consider the fact that two people in the house were communicating at 2:22 a.m. but denied speaking to each other for 22 seconds, and not to consider the fact that one of their witnesses, who was also present at the home, was unusually curious at 2:27 a.m. about how long it would take for someone to die in the cold. Commonwealth will instead try to persuade you that Karen Reed supposedly had a motive to kill John O'Keefe because they were not getting along. You'll hear about their trip to Aruba over New Year's Eve and that Karen was upset that John had been flirting with another woman.
That's fair.
And you will hear that Karen considered exploring her options after that trip, which led her to a get-together at one point with ATF federal agent Brian Higgins, although that never went anywhere.
She likes her cops.
But you'll also hear that in
Sorry, but
January of 2022, after the Aruba trip, and not long before January 28th and 29th, John O'Keefe was making long-term plans with Karen, including a family trip with her and the kids, and also another trip with Karen and another couple for months into the future.
to be
And
fair,
you'll see video of how
planning
John
is
and Karen
planning, but you know,
were
things come up in a
interacting on the night
relationship
in
ends,
question.
things come up in a
You'll
relationship
see for
ends.
yourself how they looked at each other from the video at the waterfall that night.
I don't know if you can hear that, but it
Nobody who
is
saw them that night saw
pouring.
anything wrong. There was nothing wrong. I mean, like any
That's why I
couples,
started late today, because there was
occasionally they
a
would
thunderstorm.
bicker or disagree.
I have a cat, and I
But
wanted
you
to make
will
sure he was
hear
okay. I
zero
wanted to start at
evidence of
9.
any domestic violence in that home whatsoever. John never raised a hand in anger toward Karen, and Karen never raised a hand in anger toward John. That simply wasn't who they are.
And that's good. That's
The
respectable.
notion that Karen Reed chose the start of a snowstorm to suddenly become violent out of the blue for the first time and intentionally kill her boyfriend by hitting him with her car and leaving him there with a house full of people inside is patently ridiculous.
Yeah, but it is still a
You also learn
possibility.
that what's not ridiculous is that someone, not Karen Reed, ambushed John O'Keefe. Somebody probably didn't mean to kill him, but somebody went too far.
Okay,
You
here's
learn that Trooper
other
Proctor
options.
failed to investigate
reasonable
motives
doubt.
that other people had to harm John O'Keefe. You learn that Proctor failed to investigate anything or anyone who was in the Albert residence that night. You learn that he failed to investigate the antagonistic relationship between members of the Albert family and John O'Keefe. You learn that apparently nobody investigates the Albert family of Canton. Remember, on day one, Trooper Proctor was asked whether the homeowner, Brian Albert, would catch a lot of grief. And Trooper Proctor himself said it. Nope. Homeowner's a Boston cop too. So folks, the trial is now about to start and that witnesses are about to start testifying. On behalf
Are
of Karen Reed, I
police
ask that you do two things
in a
during this
brotherhood?
trial.
Yes.
First, I ask that you pay attention
Are they going to protect
all of the
themselves
evidence.
first out of everyone else?
The way
Yes,
trials
of
work,
course.
the prosecution gets to present its case first. They
Okay, he's just talking about like the process because he's just about wrapping up. Are cops always going to protect cops first before literally anybody else? Yes. Are charges higher for someone, for a non-police officer who does harm or kills a cop? Of course, it's going to be taken more seriously. It's going to have more energy behind it. It's going to have more eyeballs because, oh my God, it's a, like a cop. ACAB, but cops, cops are going to they bleed blue, whatever that thing police officers say, especially in Massachusetts and especially in Boston. There is such a the brotherhood of police officers, the brotherhood of these like authority figures that protect and serve. Like it's so tight, it's so much like I got your back, bro. Like Pope. It is going to in something like this always be a problem with how much a cop will protect another cop before even quite possibly doing their job. Like this is so common. This energy is common, you know. So sorry, I got a message. So let's play the rest of
They
this.
conduct their direct examinations first. So we respectfully ask that you wait for us. We will get to cross-examine their witnesses, and you will find that cross-examination is the key that unlocks the truth. Wait for us. You'll be glad that you did. Second, I ask that you keep your eye on the ball. You have one job and one job only to do during this trial, and that job, quite frankly, is not to solve this case. Your only job during this trial is to determine whether the Commonwealth, the prosecution,
Commonwealth
has proven to you each and every element of the crimes they have charged,
right
beyond a reasonable doubt, to a moral certainty. The prosecution will fail to prove this case to a moral certainty.
They will
fail to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt.
a moral
You
certainty.
will reasonably doubt
Those are
their
heavy
case
words.
because their theory of the case does not make sense. You will reasonably doubt their case because Karen Reed was framed, and the evidence shows that.
I think their
Despite
theory
the
of the
fact
case
that
makes
police
sense, but I think
never ever
yours can make
investigated
sense
that
as
angle
well.
of this case at all. Because the prosecution will not prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty, we will stand before you again at the end of this trial and ask that you find Karen Reed not guilty.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Giannetti.
Or maybe push you at sidebar?
Yes.
Okay. They're going to approach. We're going to do speedy up to get ahead. And oh, look, sidebar, no audio. Sweet. Because we want to catch up so that tomorrow we start day 2. The sound is absolutely horrendous. Okay, we are going to start calling witnesses. And I will start taking notes, just like as some of the jury.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the evidence you give the court and jury in the case now and hearing to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. You may take the stand.
Put this one down.
Anytime you're ready, Ms. Tillali.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Paul O'Keefe, last name O''K''E''E''F''E.
And where do you live, sir?
I live in West Bridgewater, Massachusetts.
And how long have you lived there?
10 years.
And who, if anyone, do you live there with?
My wife, Erin, our 2 children,
And how old are your children?
13 and 10.
And both daughters, is that correct?
Correct.
And how long have you and your wife been?
Together, 24 years total. Married for 17 almost.
And what is your wife's name?
Erin,
And where did you grow up?
Braintree, Massachusetts.
Braintree.
And what are your parents' names?
My father is John, mother is Margaret.
And did you have any siblings?
2, yes. My sister, Kristen. And, excuse me, brother, John.
So this is the
And
deceased brother.
what was sort of
Jonathan's
the
brother.
order and age as far as the siblings?
My sister was the oldest. My brother was the middle. I'm the youngest. So my sister was 5 years older than me, and my brother was 3.5 years older than me.
And do you work, sir?
I do.
What do you do for work?
I'm in sales for a company, Simmons Industries, which is a manufacturer of plumbing products.
How long
Plumbing
have you been doing
products.
that?
12 years now.
Does your wife work as well?
She does.
What does she do?
She's in marketing. She works for a
Marketing.
mechanical contractor out of Randolph.
And about how long has she been doing that?
She's been with her company for a year and a half now. Before that, she had a job in working out of Boston for about 13 years.
And
I just want to
your
say I
brother,
could
John.
never imagine sitting on.
Did you call him John? Or
sitting
was
in
there
that
like
chair
a nickname or anything else that you referred to him?
I mean, we all called him
In
Johnny.
front of cameras,
especially if you're family.
in this situation. I could never imagine that.
And
Major
what did John?
Thoughts and condolences
Boston Police.
to Paul.
How long was he a member of the Boston?
16 years.
And within the Boston Police, where specifically did he sort of work?
He started in Hyde Park, Mattapan area, which I believe is E18, and transferred over to Dorchester, which is C11, and then downtown Boston for in the SOAR unit, which is the sex offender registry unit.
And when was it about that he started with the sex offender registry?
So after my sister had passed away in 2013, her husband passed away 2 months after that. My brother he took on responsibility of raising our niece and nephew. And so the Boston Police, to ensure that he was safe and protected, moved him to that unit in 2014.
And I'm sorry to ask you this, but your sister passed away in 2013, is that correct?
Correct.
And what did your sister Kristen pass away?
She had an aggressive brain tumor, which is called glioblastoma.
It's
And
incredibly
about
sad.
how much time was it between the time that she sort of received the diagnosis to her passing?
5.5 months.
Oh my God.
And you mentioned that you had a brother-in-law, Kristen's husband, is that correct?
Correct. Stephen Furbush, yes.
And when was it that he passed in relation to?
2 months later, which was January 12th, 2014.
A broken heart, I'm sure.
And they, and by they, I mean Kristen and Stephen Furbush, they had two children, is that correct?
Yes, 2 children, Kaylee and Patrick.
Which one is old?
Kaylee's the older. Patrick's a couple years younger than her, about 3 years.
How old are they now?
Kaylee is 16 and Patrick is 13.
And you mentioned, so initially when your sister Kristen passed away, what was sort of the
She was
family's
about
plan as far
14
as,
when Paul passed.
Kaylee and Patrick were concerned?
Can you repeat that?
So initially when your sister Kristen passed away and her husband Stephen was still alive, what was sort of the initial plan as far as with reference to the children?
We were kind of in scramble mode to figure out, how we were going to move forward. My wife and I had talked about having the kids come live with us. We had 2 small children at the time. 3 and 8 months were my children.
That
We
baby.
didn't have a large enough house to take on 2 other children. So
kids.
my brother stepped in, moved into the house in Canton, and raised them for
Well
8
done,
years.
Paul.
And so around this time of 2013, your sister Kristen and her husband Stephen's children, about how old were they at this time that Johnny sort of took over?
Kaylee was 6, Patrick was 3.
Now,
Those poor kids. But especially with
when
family
your brother
or close
Johnny,
friends,
sort of, what if any sort of legal
witnesses,
relationship
they are
did he
going
have
to
your niece
lean
and nephew,
on
Kaylee and Patrick?
the
He was
emotional
made a legal
attributes
guardian.
of these
And,
kids
where did
losing
Where did he
Paul
move
as
from,
their
and where did he
guardian
move
after
to
they've
when
already
he
lost their
moved out?
parents. Like I
So
said,
he was
be
living
prepared
in
for that.
Dorchester
I foresee
in a
it.
condo.
I may be wrong, but
He was living by himself, so he pretty much moved into my sister and brother-in-law's house in Canton.
oh my gosh.
Lived there for, I want to say 4 years, until sold the house and bought a different house, which is also located in Canton.
Now, the initial house that your sister Kristen and her husband Stephen lived in with Kaylee and Patrick, about how long had they been living there before your brother Johnny moved in?
They were probably there for 5 or 6 years.
Prior to that, where had your sister Kristen and either of the children lived prior to moving into that house?
Yeah, so they, Kristen and Steve actually moved in with Johnny in Dorchester when Kaylee was just a baby. Lived with him for approximately a year before they bought their home in Canton.
Now, you mentioned that at some point your brother bought a second house in Canton, moved in there with the kids. Is that right?
Correct.
Around what time was that?
I want to say 2017 or 2018 timeframe.
And they lived there up and through sort of January 28th, 29th of 2022. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, around that particular time of January 2022, about
Family
how
is
often,
hard.
did you see your brother Johnny and kids, Kaylee and Pat?
I would say probably every other week, twice a month.
And your brother in particular, how often would you communicate with him during that time?
Communicate regularly, mostly through text messaging, a couple days a week, I would say.
Now, over the course of time, you said about 8 years or so that Johnny had sort of custody of Kaylee and Patrick, correct?
Correct.
And over that course of time, about how many relationships and well, let me phrase this question. About how many long-term relationships did your brother Johnny have with women over the course of that time? And before you get to that, if I could just ask you what your definition of long-term relationship is.
Long-term relationship is, over a year.
And so how many of those types of dating relationships that lasted for at least a year did
Calling
brother have,
John Johnny.
during that time that he had the kids?
2.
And who were those 2 individuals?
Amy.
Prosecution
and,
is
Karen Reed.
comfortizing.
And,
I made that
this
word
other
up.
individual, Amy, when
John
about was it
O'Keefe,
that your
the
brother dated
deceased
her?
in this case, as Johnny.
2016, 2017 timeframe, I think.
And did this other woman that he dated named Amy, did she have children of her own?
Yeah, she had 2 sons.
It may
Now, you
be
mentioned two, so other than naming, who was the other one?
like
Her two sons' names are Gabriel and Christian.
where they're
I'm sorry.
from.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All
In
Johns are
reference to,
Johnny.
you mentioned two women that your brother had dated
But
for
in my
a
opinion,
long-term
anything
period,
that
correct?
these
Yes,
prosecutors
correct.
or these lawyers,
One of them
excuse me,
was the
are
woman
going
Amy
to
that you were
do
just
is
speaking about, correct?
intentional.
Correct.
And who was the second one?
Karen Reed.
And is Karen Reed someone that you had met through the course of your brother dating her?
Yes.
So clear for the record, do you see Miss Reed in the courtroom today? Do you identify as to where she's seated or an article of clothing that she's wearing?
Yep. She is seated right there between Mr. Giannetti and Mr. Jackson.
Does the record reflect identification of the defendant by the witness?
No
Yeah.
objection.
Yes.
Now, Mr. O'Keefe, when was it that you first met Karen?
I believe it was Mother's Day. So maybe May of 2020.
Now, prior to that, were you aware of any other time when Miss Reed and your brother Johnny had dated in the past?
They dated
Moved
very
to
briefly in
1.25 states,
2004.
just a little bit.
And had you had occasion to meet
You
her
got
during
catching up
that
to do.
brief period where they dated in 2004?
I did not meet her back then, no.
And so the first time you met her would have been sometime in the spring of 2020, correct?
Correct.
And what was your understanding as far as when they had reconnected or gotten back together in reference to when you met her?
They reconnected. I believe my brother reached out to her in March of 2020, right at the beginning of COVID. I think he reached out to her via Facebook Messenger and then, text.
And they resumed some kind of relationship, and you had occasion to meet or see Karen Reed over the course of hanging out with your brother at various occasions, correct?
Correct, yep.
Now, about how often would you see Miss Reed? Would it be the same, more or less than when you saw your brother?
Almost the same, maybe a little less. If my brother was just, it was just him and I or his friends, but for the most part, he was with Karen.
And as far as your understanding, what was sort of the living arrangements with regard to Miss Reed and your brother?
She has her own home in Mansfield, Massachusetts. She would stay at my brother's house in Canton, I would say 3, maybe 4 nights a week.
And that would be at your brother's house with both he and your niece and nephew.
Correct.
Now, with regard to, you mentioned that they reconnected sometime around the COVID-19 pandemic. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And with regard to your brother and defendant Ms. Reed and the children, what was sort of going on as far as school and work with regard to the pandemic, with regard to each individual?
So that was a period of time when schools were closed and kids had to do remote learning. So Kaylee and Patrick were both at home, remote learning, and my brother, didn't have a job where he can work remote, so he had to go into the office. And most of the time, Karen would be at home with the kids during the day while she worked remotely.
So
Now,
Karen
you mentioned
was
earlier that your brother had a legal
quit
guardianship role with regard to the children, correct?
Correct, yes.
What, if any,
to
legal
stay
status or role
and
did
be
the
there
defendant have with
and
regard to the children?
She didn't have any.
sure help assist with the day-to-day life with those
Now,
kids.
with regard to your brother and the defendant's relationship,
Makes her
what,
look
if any,
good.
conversations did you have with your brother in regard to status of their relationship or any issues in their relationship?
He didn't say too much. If they were arguing, he might, give reference that they were arguing. Didn't really tell me what they were arguing about, but mostly kept that stuff to himself.
What, if anything, did he mention to you as far as
What if
reasons
any-
for an argument or sort of points of contention?
He didn't like, if she would spend a lot of money on the kids for gifts, or, I know there was some arguments over, what she fed them, whether it's, Dunkin' Donuts or whatnot, but those things along those lines.
Duncan,
Now,
you cannot take the Duncan out of Massachusetts.
what, if any,
Anton, born and
sort of,
raised or not, they go into
what if,
Duncan.
what, if any, occasions, as far as they're arguing or anything like that, did you observe personally yourself?
Yeah, I witnessed.
Everyone has
They
disagreements
had
in
rented
relationships.
a house down in Cape Cod. Say that was summer of 2021. I brought my 2 daughters down for a couple nights, and I witnessed, one intense fight between the 2 of them.
And as far as a fight as you're characterizing that, was that anything physical or just verbal?
No, it was a verbal argument.
And what, if anything, was that verbal argument about?
It's hard to recall. I mean, I guess like typical couples fighting. There was alcohol that had been involved. I recall her complaining that he wasn't nice to her, or something to that effect, and I was kind of the referee in that entire situation.
Now, when you make reference to alcohol involved, was that one or both? Or
Both.
both your brother and the defendant?
Correct.
Now, if I could turn your attention to New Year's, and specifically New Year's Eve going from 2021 into 2022. Recall that time?
I do.
And do you recall where you and your family were for that sort of New Year's celebration?
Yeah, so I was with my wife and her family. We went to Aruba the day after Christmas in celebration of my wife's mother's 70th birthday.
Ms. Tallali, does it make sense that I give an instruction at this point? I'm going to see counsel at sidebar.
Okay, sidebar. I will skip ahead until audio is back, and then I have to step away for a minute.
Okay. So during that New Year's Eve, you were in Aruba for your wife's mother's 70th birthday, correct?
Okay, I will be right back.
And was your brother, Johnny, was he also in Aruba around that same time frame?
Yes.
And your resort and your brother's resorts, where were they in relation to each other?
They were pretty much on opposite sides of the island.
And at any point in time when you were in Aruba, did you see your brother at any point?
Unfortunately, we did not.
Now, you mentioned that you were there with your wife and your children. Is that correct?
Correct.
And do you know who your brother was in Aruba with around that same time?
He was with Karen Reed and brought the kids. So Kaylee and Patrick were with him. They were also with a large group, many other couples and families.
You know who was sort of the primary organizer of that group that your brother was with?
Yes, a friend of ours, Laura Sullivan.
And how did you know Laura Sullivan?
I knew Laura through my brother. She had dated my brother's partner and one of his best friends, Pat Rogers.
And did Miss Sullivan and Mr. Rogers have a child together?
Yes, and a boy.
And at some point, did Mr. Rogers pass away?
Yes.
What was sort of the relationship between your brother and Miss Sullivan in relation to Mr. Rogers' child?
Johnny was, so she has a son, Benjamin, who Johnny is godfather to.
And sort of towards the end of your stay in Aruba, with regard to the pandemic, what, if anything, happened to you or any other member of the family?
So my older daughter tested positive for COVID. So her and I kind of got left behind, stayed for an extra 3 or 4 days, I believe.
So after you returned from Aruba, at some point, were you and your brother trying to make plans to connect or to hang out or see each other at some point in January 2022?
Yes, we were actually planning on getting together on January 29th.
And do you recall what day of the week that was?
That was a Saturday.
And why was it Saturday? Why were you sort of targeting Saturday as a viewpoint?
A weekend, no work. Kids didn't really have much on the schedule.
By that, you mean your kids as well as...
Correct.
Nothing?
Yes.
And then what, if anything, occurred with reference to those plans as far as them coming to fruition?
A big snowstorm hit the area, and we'd said maybe it's probably better if we just stay home and off the roads. So we kind of canceled getting together the day before.
So initially had a meeting for the 29th, but canceled it the day before on the 28th.
Correct.
So this snowstorm that you were talking about that was coming in, is that something that you and your brother were aware of prior to that day it happened?
Yes.
And was that something you learned of? Where did you learn about that?
The news.
So sort of all over the news, is that fair to say?
Correct. Yes.
And as far as did either you, your children, or John's children, for lack of a better term, niece and nephew, were there any sort of planned activities for that day that got canceled because of the weather or no?
On that Saturday, the 29th, I think everything was pretty much canceled. I don't know anything specific. We had, my daughters had basketball on Friday night, the night before, but we didn't really have any plans for the children on Saturday.
Now, turning your attention to that day of the 28th, so the day before that was a Friday, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And you mentioned that your daughters had basketball that evening, is that correct?
Correct.
And what, if any, role do you have in regard to your daughter's
I coached both of their teams.
And so you coached 2 games that Friday night?
Correct.
And about what time do you know that if you know, did you sort of get home from all of that?
First game was at 6, second game was at 7:15, so we got home 8:30ish.
And your wife was with you at both of your daughter's games?
Correct. And
when you got home, the snow that had been predicted, had it started at that point where you were?
I noticed the first flurries sometime between 10:30 and 11 p.m.
And if you know, approximately what time did you go to bed then?
Right around probably midnight.
And your wife, Erin, did she go to bed same time as you?
I think she went to bed a little before me, yes.
Now, earlier in that day, that Friday the 28th, what, if any, conversation by any means did you have with your brother John?
My last communication with him was on a group text exchange that included myself, Karen Reed, and my mother. And he was excited because our niece Kaylee had gotten accepted to Bishop Feehan High School. So he was happy, proud dad moment. And then Patrick's national math scores came back, and he scored extremely high. So he was extremely proud of Patrick that day as well.
So he had sort of sent, your brother John had sort of sent that to the group, which included yourself, your mother, and Miss Reed.
Correct.
And your niece Kaylee, as far as what grade was she in and what grade was she going into as far as that application to?
Yeah, so she was 8th grade going into 9th, freshman year in high school.
Now you go to bed at some point in the evening of the 28th, and you woke up on the 29th. Do you recall what woke you up on that morning?
Yes, my mother called me at 6:40 a.m.
Is that something typical?
No. She called and just said something happened to your brother. They found him in the snow, and they took him to the hospital.
And which hospital was it?
Good Samaritan in Brockton, Massachusetts.
And at that point, did you, or what, if any, other sort of information did you have as to what had happened to you?
I really didn't know much until I got to the hospital. While I was at the hospital, my cousin works 911 dispatch, so she came down because she had heard. And the only thing I was able to get was that, he was cold and they needed to warm him up, but didn't have much information other than that.
So you get that information from your cousin when you get to the hospital, correct?
Correct.
That cousin, what was her name?
Susanna Hensley.
If I could take you back to just prior, so you initially get the phone call from your mother, Peggy O'Keefe, is that correct?
Correct.
That's about 6:40 in the morning?
Correct.
And your wife Erin is with you at that time, is that correct?
Correct.
And so you get that call, and sort of what is it that you do, or sort of how quickly are you out the door?
I jumped out of bed, got changed, brushed my teeth, and I was out the door.
And you drove from your house to where?
Yes, I drove myself from my house to the hospital, Good Samaritan Hospital.
And what kind of car did you have at that point, if you know?
A Toyota 4Runner.
That's a SUV?
That's an SUV, yes.
What color was it?
Black.
And as far as the road conditions, visibility, sort of when you're driving from West Bridgewater to Brockton, what, if anything, did you observe as far as how the roads were?
Driving was very poor that morning and just continued to get worse throughout the day. So it took me longer than usual than it typically would to drive that distance.
Now, as far as your parents were concerned, did they come to the Good Samaritan Hospital as well?
Yes, our friend Kerry Roberts picked them up in Braintree and brought them to the hospital in Brockton.
When you say your friend Kerry Roberts, how do you know Kerry Roberts?
So we grew up in Braintree. She grew up in Braintree as well. 2 years older than me. Knew my brother. They went to homecoming together one year. And she also resides in Canton.
So she was someone who had grown up with you and your brother, was friends with you, and also friends with your brother, correct?
Correct.
Now, as far as your arrival at the Good Samaritan, who arrived first? Was it you, your parents, or something else?
I got there first.
And about how long was it, if you know, between the time that you got there and the time that your parents arrived there with the brothers?
Probably about 45 minutes.
And when you arrived at the Good Samaritan Medical Center, where within the facility did you sort of go?
Emergency room waiting area, lobby.
And at some point, did you, after your parents arrived, did you move from the waiting room area to somewhere else within the hospital?
So when my parents arrived, they brought us, in the double doors into like a little family sitting room.
And about how long was it that you were in the family sitting room before you went somewhere else?
So we were in that waiting room. Doctor and nurse came in and told us that all their efforts to save my brother were unsuccessful and that he had passed away. And then asked if we wanted to go see him, in which we said yes. So we left that room and walked down the hallway to this hospital room.
And that doctor you spoke to, do you recall what the doctor's name was?
Dr. Rice.
And when you say that we went down to the room where your brother was that everyone in the group?
It was myself and my parents, yes.
And Ms. Roberts, did she go as well? Or did she?
No, she stayed out in the waiting area.
And as you were making your way down to the room where they had your brother, what if anything occurred along the way?
So I noticed Karen Reed was there. She was being restrained by hospital employees, and she was, screaming out to us, asking if he was alive.
Is that something that she screamed out once, more than once, or something else?
Several times.
Now, at some point, you went into the room where your brother was, correct?
Correct.
And can you describe to the jury sort of what you saw as far as your brother was concerned?
He was pretty banged up. He had his eyes had swelled up. He had a breathing tube in, well, a mask anyway. Blood come down his nose, blood come down his mouth. But what really stood out to me was, the eyes. It was almost as if like there were ping pong balls under his eyelids. They were that swollen.
Now, in addition to what you observed as far as his eyes, what, if any, other sort of injuries did you observe on any other part of your brother's body?
I noticed some markings on his arm. Didn't look at his lower torso area at all because he was, covered by a sheet. So most of the injuries that, we observed was to the head area and face area.
And when you say his arm, do you recall whether that was one arm, both arms, or which arm in particular?
He had markings on his right arm. I didn't notice anything on the other side.
You spent some time privately as a family with your brother. At some point you left, is that correct?
Yes, we were. I would estimate we were probably in the room with him for probably 20 minutes until we left.
And after about that 20 minutes, you come back out to the hallway, and where are you going?
We went back to the waiting area, trying to figure out, can we leave? Do we leave? So yes, we left. My mother drove with me. My father drove with Kerry Roberts. We went from the hospital at Good Samaritan in Brockton back to my brother's house in Canton.
And if I could just take you back for a moment. So as you exit the room where your brother is and you come back out in the hallway, what, if anything, occurred at that point?
Again, we saw Karen Reed being restrained by hospital employees, screaming the same things. Is he alive? Is he alive? Is he alive?
You, at any point, either before or after, respond to any of that screaming that you heard from the defendant?
I actually blew her a kiss.
Now, as far as your relationship with the defendant, Ms. Reed, prior to January 29th, 2022, how would you characterize it?
I thought we had a good relationship. I held her in very high regard. I thought she was a good influence on my niece and nephew. I appreciated all the help that she was providing to my brother with the kids. We go out together as couples a couple times. She became very friendly with my wife, but I'd say overall we had a good relationship.
As far as those positive feelings that you had in relation to the defendant prior to January 29th, 2022, had you expressed those to either the defendant or any member of her family?
Yes. So Christmas Eve of 2021 was the first time I met her parents. My brother hosted Christmas Eve at his house. I met Mr. and Mrs. Reed. I offered to help Mrs. Reed carry some things in from her car. And as we were walking to the car, I said, I just want to tell you, I think your daughter's great. I think very appreciative of what she's done for the kids and helping my brother.
Now, Turning back to that day of January 29th, you go back out to the waiting area, is that correct?
Yes.
And what, if anything, happened? What did you see or speak to when you got out there?
I saw her father, Bill Reed, come into the hospital. He was picking up Karen as we were pretty much exiting the hospital to head back to Canton.
And did you have any conversation with him?
I did not.
Now, you indicated that you drove with your mother back to Meadows Ave where your brother lived, is that correct?
That's correct.
And Ms. Roberts drove with your father back to the same location, is that correct?
That is correct.
And as far as your understanding sort of on the drive back, where were the kids? Where was Kaylee and Patrick?
So Kaylee was picked up by Mike Camerano, who's Kaylee's best friend's father. Patrick was at a sleepover the night before, so he was still with the family of the house where he slept the night before.
And you mentioned that the drive from your house in West Bridgewater to Brockton was somewhat difficult, correct?
Very difficult.
How would you characterize the drive from Brockton to your brother's house in Canton?
I mean, at one point I said to my mother, I don't know if we're gonna make it back. Visibility was terrible. Couldn't see the roads. We made it back. It was just a very, very difficult. Probably the worst driving conditions I've driven in as far as weather. And
so then, at some point, you and your vehicle, Ms. Roberts, and hers, and your parents, you arrived at your brother's house in Canton, correct?
That's correct.
You know about what time of day that was?
It was mid-morning, so maybe between 10 and 11 o'clock in the morning. And
was there anybody present at the house when you arrived there?
No.
And at some point, did other people come over, as far as specifically I'm asking about the children?
Yes, so Kaylee was dropped off shortly after we arrived. And then a little while after that, Patrick was dropped off from his sleepover.
And at some point, you were tasked with informing the children what happened to your brother, correct?
Correct.
At some point after you left the hospital in Brockton, what, if any, conversation or what, if any, phone calls did you receive in relation to the defendant, Ms. Reed?
Karen Reed called me, asked me if it was okay to come over and to see the kids, and I said sure.
And do you know how long that phone call went on for?
It was a quick phone call, maybe a minute. I said she just asked if she could come over, and I said sure. And then she arrived at the house, shortly thereafter.
When you initially arrived at the house, along with your parents and Ms. Roberts and her vehicle, what, if any, other vehicles did you observe sort of in the driveway at that time?
I only noticed, I think, my brother's car. I mean, I don't even recall seeing any other cars. I mean, there could have been a car in the garage, but I didn't notice really. Nothing stands out.
What kind of car did your brother have?
Chevy Traverse.
What color was that, if you know?
Like gray.
And if you recall, when you first sort of arrived there, where was that vehicle parked in relation to the front?
I believe it was the right side of the driveway, all the way down to the end of the drive, like the top of the driveway.
Now, you had the phone call with the defendant. You indicated it's fine for her to come over. You know about how long it was after receiving that phone call and when Ms. Reed arrived there?
20 to 30 minutes, maybe.
And when she arrived at your brother's house, who, if anyone, was she with?
She was with her father.
And at some point, was there anyone else from her family that came over the house that morning?
Her brother and his wife showed up shortly after she arrived with her father, yes.
And how many cars, if you know, come in between sort of
They each took separate vehicles, so 2 cars arrived.
And Ms. Reed's vehicle, do you know where that vehicle was in relation to your brother's house at that time?
It was either in the driveway or in the garage. I'm not positive.
So fair to say it was at the house, correct?
It was at the house, yes.
So between the Reed family, there's 3 vehicles at your brother's house, correct?
Correct.
Now, the defendant mentioned that you had met her father before on Christmas Eve, is that right?
Correct.
Had you met her brother or brother's wife prior to that day?
No.
And you were in the house when they arrived, is that correct?
When Karen and her father arrived, I was shoveling the walkway out front.
And in total, about how much time was the defendant at the house that morning when she came in?
I would probably say about 30 minutes.
And at that point, when the defendant arrived, was either Kaylee or Patrick or both home at that time?
Yes, Kaylee had come home first, and then Patrick had come home. So I think Patrick may have come home while they were there.
And you mentioned when they arrived, you were out shoveling sort of the front walk, correct?
Yes.
And when they arrived, did you go in the house with them, or did you continue shoveling or something else?
I continued shoveling for a very short period of time, and went in the house like pretty much right after they did.
And when you got in the house, what was it sort of that you were doing at that time?
I mean, we had just told Kaylee what had happened, and we were waiting for Patrick to get home, so we were kind of just congregated in the kitchen.
When you say we, who exactly are you talking
Sorry, myself, my mother, my father.
Was Ms. Roberts still there, or is she gone home?
I don't recall.
And so, in addition to yourself, your mother, and your father, Ms. Reed, her father, any other sort of members of her family, where were they within the house?
So mainly the kitchen at first. When Patrick came home, we kind of took him to like the side room where the kids hang out. Talked to him in that room, and then we were in the kitchen. Then Miss Reed and her father went upstairs.
And when you sat down with Patrick to tell him what had happened to your brother, who, if anyone else, was with you at that point?
Karen Reed.
And at some point subsequent to that, you went back to the kitchen, correct?
Yes.
And where was it that the defendant and her father went?
Upstairs into the
I
bedroom.
know I wasn't
And, if you
here
know about how long
during
were they
a
in the
very
upstairs
difficult
area?
part of it, but I was still
I
listening.
would say 10 to 15 minutes.
And them as they came
It's
down.
very difficult to listen to.
Yeah, so I was on
and
the phone
to hear
a few
and
times.
to see
So I didn't watch them walk upstairs, but I saw them come downstairs, turn the corner at the bottom
Paul
of the stairs.
reliving,
She had
going through, walking
some of her
through
belongings
his
that she had
experiences with this.
taken from the bedroom.
And where did she go with those belongings?
They left. Like I said, they were probably there for 30 minutes. They got in their cars and drove back to Dayton, Massachusetts.
And when you say go back in their cars, you mentioned 3 cars that had been there in the driveway or in the area of the house, correct?
Correct.
When the defendant left, how many of those cars remained?
0.
And as far as the weather conditions that you had mentioned that existed at the time that you drove from the hospital in Brockton to your brother's home in Canton, what if any improvement occurred with the weather during that time frame?
None.
So essentially the same, is that fair to say?
Yeah, it was still, the conditions were still poor.
Now, with respect to Ms. Reed's vehicle, did you know what kind of vehicle Ms. Reed had?
A Lexus SUV. I don't know the actual model.
You're going to hear Lexus a lot.
Mr. Lally, that clock is actually wrong. It's just about 1 o'clock. So is this a good place to take a break?
Perfectly fine.
All right. All right, jurors, it's the luncheon break. We'll break for an hour. We'll be here ready to go no later than 2 o'clock.
All right, please. Put them on your chair.
All right. So taking a little break, little breather. I am going to skedaddle right through here until court comes back, and we will jump right in.
All right, whenever you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay.
So, Mr. O'Keefe.
The stenographer, the one that you saw with the
You
thing on
testified
her
before
face,
the luncheon recess.
She's
before,
vocalizing
you had
her,
indicated that
no, like her stenographer. So
defendant
she's
Ms. Reed had gone upstairs for some
speaking
period
into
of
it.
time. Is that correct?
Very
Correct.
interesting.
And that's at your brother's house on Meadows Ave.
Correct.
No one can hear.
And who, if anyone, had she gone
And
upstairs
she
with?
Her father.
But how long were they upstairs for?
was a very interesting
10, 15
piece of
minutes.
technology.
And as far as, was there anyone else in the upstairs area of the home with them at the time that they were upstairs?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Now, as far as Ms. Reed was concerned, what, if any, conversation did you have with her while she was at the house for that period of 30 minutes or so?
None really.
And as far as any other members of her family, without any reference to what it was, what, if any, sort of substantial conversation, what, if any, conversation did you have with either her father, her brother, or the brother's wife?
Again, none. Not really. I didn't really have much interaction with any of them while they're at the house.
Now, you're obviously familiar with your brother's house on Meadows Ave, is that correct?
Yes.
And as far as the house itself, what, if any, sort of security did your brother have installed on that house on Meadows Ave?
He's gonna excuse me, a ring doorbell, and then a Ring camera floodlight combination above the garage doors overlooking the driveway.
And when you say the doorbell, how many sort of how many doors or entrances into the house were there?
With cameras, I would say 2. I mean, the driveway and then the main front door of the house.
Are they approach the witness?
Yes.
Maybe just 3 photographs. It's 2, 3, and 4. If you could just look at those briefly and look up when you're finished. And generally speaking, sir, do you recognize what's depicted in those 3 photographs?
Yes, the first.
Before we get to them, just in general,
yes.
do you recognize those? Okay. And what do you recognize this in general terms? What do you recognize them to be photographs of?
That's my brother's house at 1 Meadows Ave in Canton.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have Exhibit 2 up on the screen. So I'm going to shift my approach again. I'm going to hand you here as a laser point.
Okay.
And again, so what's up on the screen is Exhibit number 2. What are we looking at?
That's my brother's house at 1 Meadows Ave in Canton.
And as far as the Ring doorbell camera that you were referring to, is that something that's visible in this photograph?
Not in that photograph, no.
And so typically when you would come over to your brother's
Take
house,
myself off.
what would be sort of the general points or door that you would use to go inside the house?
So either the garage door or there's a side door right behind that bush.
So behind that bush, is there any sort of like walkway or anything like that over there?
Yeah, so there's a walkway that leads up to a couple of steps and then to the entryway.
Is that where the Ring doorbell would have been located, labeled as sort of the front door?
Yes.
And the garage area with the driveway that you were referencing in relation to this photograph, it's not depicted in this photograph, is that fair to say?
Correct.
So which sort of, with relation to this photograph, understanding that it's not depicted in it, where would that be?
The driveway would be to the right side of the house as we're viewing it from here.
And if I could turn your attention to the next exhibit number 3, Ms. Gilman, if I could have that. And what's up on the screen, is that what you have before you as exhibit number 3?
Correct.
And whereabouts in relation to the house, what are we looking at here?
So that would be the driveway, right side of the house, 2 garage doors, the upstairs window, and the Ring camera / floodlight combination.
Now, with respect to the garage, was there a particular way that your brother would have kept sort of the garage area?
Yeah, he had on the left side, he had a 1971 Ford LTD parked over that side. And he would typically park his car on the right side.
So the car that you were talking about before, that being the Chevy Traverse, is that correct?
Correct.
And so the floodlight combination with the camera, that you see that in this photograph, is that correct?
Yes,
If you could, just using the laser pointer directed your attention to that.
right under the window.
And as far as these particular Ring cameras, driveway, garage one, and front door, the sort of side entryway there, who, if anyone, as far as you knew, had access to those particular cameras, how would they be accessed?
Most likely through the Ring app on your cell phone. And I believe the only ones who had access to was my brother and Karen Reed.
And as far as your brother,
All right, I'll strike that, see if you can lay a foundation.
as far as your brother was, how
How
if
does he
anything would
know?
he do with reference to those
They need
Ring
more
cameras
reason
and
to
that
take
on
that
his
as
phone
true.
when people would arrive at his house?
I mean, a few times he'd talk to me through the speaker. You know, if I pulled up to the house and he wasn't home, and he would speak to me on it. But I'm not sure if I follow the entire question.
No, and that's exactly, so there were points where you would come to the house, correct, and he wasn't there,
Yes.
and he would sort of talk to you through the Ring application, is that
Yeah.
fair to say?
Yes.
Like one
Now,
of those
as far
like
as Ms. Reed was
throwers for dogs.
When you say
Little
you
dog saying
believe
at
she
the
had
camera,
access to it,
like,
what leads you?
retreat.
I believe the kids had mentioned it before. Kaylee and Patrick, mostly Patrick.
All right, I'm going to strike that.
Now, if I could direct your attention to the next exhibit before you, exhibit number 4. And again, sir, what's up on the screen, is that what you have before you as exhibit 4?
Correct.
And if you could describe to the jury sort of what part of the house we're looking at here and what, if anything, in relation to the Ring that you observed.
That is also the driveway from a different view. Call it the top of the driveway looking down onto the street. Right In this picture here, the ring camera or the floodlight ring is not visible.
And the walkway that you were talking about that was behind the bush, do you see that in the photograph?
Yes.
If you could direct the jury's attention to where that is. So if you follow that walkway sort of around to the bush, where does that lead?
Right to the like breezeway door.
If I may approach it.
Yes.
Now, Mr. O'Keefe, the ring camera that we're talking about, have you seen those on like a disc form? Is that correct?
Have I seen them on a disc form? I'm not sure if I follow that question.
Sure. Have you viewed any ring camera footage from either the front door or the driveway to your brother's house?
No, I didn't have access.
Okay. Now,
Just ask questions that make sense.
you know, maybe approach.
Yes.
Any questions so far?
All right. So, Mr. Lally, you have something to mark as an exhibit?
Yes, Your Honor. So there are two discs, one labeled Meadow Ave ring videos. Oh, sorry.
So they've already been
Already
marked.
been marked.
All right. So the next, go right ahead.
No. Okay. So
And let us know if you want the lights dimmed at all, Mr. Lally.
yes, please, Your Honor.
Do you want that now?
Yes.
Dim
Would
the
please?
light
Thank you.
and close the blinds.
So, Ms. Gilman, if I could have from what's been marked as Exhibit 6, driveway camera. If I could have video number 161. And if you could just pause that just for a moment. Now, Mr. O'Keefe, what's up on the screen there? Do you generally recognize what's depicted there?
It looks like Karen
Jump
Reed's
right into
vehicle,
it. Okay.
my brother's vehicle, and it looks like another SUV behind it.
I'm not a
the two
big
people.
car person,
If
so
you
to
could,
me,
just
I
using
just
the laser
see
pointer before, if you could
three
just direct
black
your attention to
SUVs. I'll take myself
which vehicle
off.
you're talking about when
Picture.
you. So starting with Ms. Reed's vehicle, where is it in this video that you observed?
I believe it's that one right there.
Okay,
And your brother's vehicle
Is back there.
okay. Put
and
the snow
vehicle
on
you're
top.
referring to is your vehicle, where is it?
Okay.
And if you know, when about is this video depicting in relation to what you've described as the events of January 29th?
I mean, that would be in the morning coming back from the hospital, mid-morning.
And as far as the people within this video, do you recognize any of the people within?
That'd be myself. I believe that behind me could be Kerry Roberts, because I believe that's Kerry Roberts' car. She drove my father back from the hospital to One Meadows.
And Ms. Stillman, if you could just run the video.
Oh, that's my mother.
Okay, so this is footage of after they come back from the hospital. I remember this is at 1.25 speed, so it is a little faster, so they look a little extra like frantic. But
Ms. Gilman, from the same exhibit, if I could have go mark 165.
but also walking in snow is always, it's awkward. Walking in snow is awkward. Like sand.
Again, Ms. Gilman, if you could just pause that briefly. Now, with respect to this video, do you recognize the vehicle that just pulled into the driveway?
That looks like Karen Reed in the photo, on the video. I assume that's her father's car.
So this would have been the time that Ms. Reed, the defendant, arrived with her family from the hospital as well?
Correct.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could just run that.
She gets back into her vehicle. And then skedaddles out of the weather into the side door with what looked like to be her father. You can hear the wind, and you can see.
Thank you. If I could ask for the next labeled video.
I don't know, if someone is watching and they're not like familiar with snow. The snow has not been cleared off of this car. Not because you can see the snow on the hood of the car. There's a little bit of snow here when the wipers are up, so it doesn't seem like that car has been wiped off really, really well. This car's been cleaned off really well. This car looks like to have been cleaned off really well. The back of this car, which I believe this is Karen Reed's car, is just plastered with snow. Why? Wind. You can see the snow up here on the hood of John's car, and a thick layer of snow on the back of the car, not as thick as Karen's, because it's probably been cleaned off, and then driving and during the wind, it layered up again. Thick layer of snow here. This is all wind activity. Why isn't there any here? Because it's being blown across a smooth surface type of energy. So there is snow buildup on this car, around this car. You can also see the dip of snow from the hood, and right here, I don't know if I can zoom in, right behind the back bumper, you can see the dip of the snow. So this car has been sitting, and there isn't snow underneath it because the car is on top of the ground and it's been there since before the snow started to fall. You can see the snow at the same level underneath all the other cars. So I don't know if anyone cares, but snow. Living in snow.
If I could ask for the next labeled video from Exhibit 6, number 166.
Okay, so this is the next video.
I'd ask you to pause there. Now, Mr. O'Keefe, with the last video, the two individuals sort of walking over to the house, do you recognize who those were?
It appeared to be Karen Reed and her father.
And the individual who just got out of the same vehicle, do you recognize that?
That appears to be Karen Reed's brother, Nathan.
Again, this particular day, January 29th, at the brother's house, that's the first time that you met him, is that correct?
Correct.
Ms. Gilman, if you could just play this one together.
He's able to recognize these people. He knows these people. To me, in my honest opinion, this could all be two of the same people, a man and a woman, and I can tell by the coats. So I am not at the point of being able to recognize the difference of these people. Yeah. Ice. An ice off the windshield, maybe. Yeah, so the wipers work. Clearing off for a drive, making sure. I don't know what they're doing. If this is
Ms. Gilman, from the same exhibit number 6, if I could have video.
That was Karen's brother in a house where Karen's boyfriend, John, did just pass away, and he doesn't know anybody. If I was in that same situation in a house full of people who recently found, their son, their brother, their boyfriend passed away, and I didn't know anyone, I would probably also go out and make sure the cars are okay. Like it would be a very awkward situation. Not like, oh, this is awkward, but like it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be tense. And if you weren't part of like that life that was lived, like especially the most recent part, the relationships, the family, the parents, the gatherings, if you weren't at Christmas and Thanksgiving, it's going to feel a little weird. So you would probably be the one to volunteer to make sure like the cars in the snow are kind of taken care of, like that's just kind of my vibe.
Video 169.
Just sort of identifying who that person is doesn't really help the jury, in my opinion.
Now, as far as you mentioned earlier in your testimony that after Ms. Reed arrived
recognizing
at the
that
house,
there's activity, there's
came home as
people
well.
coming,
Correct.
and
And
that's
do you see your nephew Patrick in this video up on the screen now?
Yes.
So this would depict when he got dropped off, essentially.
Correct.
Ms. Gilman, if you could just run that, please.
Right, 3 people just exited the house after Green Hoodie went in. Like I said earlier, the prosecution has a plan here, and they are laying the foundation. They're getting identifications. They're getting cars. They're getting timestamps. They're getting dates. They're getting all that in place to make their case.
Ms. Gilman, from the same exhibit 6, if I could have number 176.
Oh my gosh, the wind is whipping.
Now, from this video, you referenced earlier in your testimony, Ms. Reed had gathered some belongings and then had left with all of the vehicles that her family came, correct?
Correct.
And do you recognize anyone depicted in this video, number 176?
That's Karen Reed.
And what, if anything, do you observe in this video her to have in her hand at this time?
Looks like some type of a bag.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could just play this one.
What is in the bag? What is in the bag? She gets in her own car or not? Oh, wait, the glitchiness of the video. Who opened that other door? I'm confused. Okay. Getting the car warmed up. The feet are probably soaking wet and freezing, helping get the ice off so the wipers work. Especially if you're getting on like a highway or freeway, you want your windshield wipers to work and not be straight.
Now, Ms. Gilman, if I could have from the same exhibit 6, number 178. I could ask you to respond right there. Now, Mr. O'Keefe, you were at your brother's house on Meadows Ave for the majority of that day, correct?
Yes.
About how long were you there into the evening?
Yes.
And at some point were attempts made in and around your brother's house, driveway, the walkway, things of that nature, as far as snow removal was concerned?
At one point, other than me shoveling, Patrick's friend's father came with a snowblower.
And so initially it was you shoveling, what if anything was your father doing while you were shoveling as well?
It was just me shoveling.
And do you recognize what's depicted up in this video as far as any individuals in this video?
I believe that is me standing there with a shovel.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could just...
I hope it is you if you're the only one shoveling. Secret mystery man comes to shovel. Getting that path shoveled out. It's easier to shovel and do it little by little. Keep going back out. Shovel, go warm up. Shovel, go warm up. Lift with your knees. A lot of snow.
Ms. Gilman, from that same Exhibit 6, could I have video number 185? Ms. Gilman, if you could just pause it right there. Now, in reference to the snowblower coming out, or sort of the friend of Patrick, the father of Patrick's friends, you recognize anybody in this video here?
I'm assuming that's the father of Patrick's friend, but I'm not sure.
So fair to say this was later in the day after you were out there shoveling and after the defendant had left the house, is that correct?
Yes.
And with regard to that particular day of January 29th, do you recall any law enforcement, whether they PD or state police, coming to the house while you were there that day?
Not on the 29th, no.
During the course of clearing driveway out as far as snow or ice, what, if anything, did you observe?
Wait, the day that he was pronounced dead, there was no law enforcement that came. No law enforcement came to the house where the family and the girlfriend and the friend of the girlfriend, like where everyone was. No law enforcement came and said like, "Hey, this is weird and we're investigating." No law enforcement came. That seems weird to me.
You observe as far as beyond just sort of snow and ice? Were there any sort of other items within the driveway that you recall seeing, or?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could just play this video.
He's making note that there was no red glass from a taillight scene. Thick snow. Snow blowing ain't easy. Snow blowing ain't easy. Snow blowing. Okay.
Thank you. And lastly, from this exhibit, Ms. Gilman, if you could, from Exhibit 6, pull up video number 239.
239. I'm taking notes.
Mr. O'Keefe,
All
what's
right.
up on the screen right now is that essentially what the driveway looked like at the end of sort of the snow blowing and the shoveling and snow removal that day.
Yes.
And that vehicle towards the top, that's your vehicle, is that correct?
Yes.
And is this around the time that you would have been leaving your brother's house on January 29th?
Yes.
Ronnie, how are you? Thanks for popping in. I love that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
May I approach the witness,
We're
John?
doing trial. We're doing trial. I'm like so here for it.
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have exhibit 1 on.
8 weeks. 8 weeks. 8 weeks.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could just enlarge that a little.
And begin.
Thank you very much. Now, what's up on the screen, Mr. O'Keefe? Is that what you have before you with exhibit number 1?
Yes.
And what are we looking at in this exhibit?
That's my brother.
And as far as your earlier testimony in regard to the vehicle that he kept sort of on the left side of the garage, what, if anything, do you recognize?
It's depicted in the picture. It's a convertible 1971 Ford LTD.
And with reference to that vehicle, how did your brother feel about that vehicle?
He enjoyed it. He thought it was fun driving around, in a convertible. Nephew Patrick enjoyed, being driven to baseball games and whatnot in it. So.
And your niece, Kaylee, how did she feel about it?
She did not like it. Still doesn't.
Thanks, sir. May I approach
Judge
the
giggled.
I have nothing further.
All right.
Mr. O'Keefe, sir, I have no questions for you.
All right, Mr. O'Keefe, you are all set, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
1 second, Jody.
I'm good. I'm I'm good. I'm just like ready to just like
You're next.
I'm sorry, the Commonwealth will call Mrs. Erin O'Keefe to the stand.
I'm just in it. I'm just in it. But I'm good. I'm having a good time. I mean, it's terrible circumstances. I know it sounds awful. Like, oh, I'm having a good time, you know, like covering a trial that's about murder, but it's like I can't go back in time. I can't change it, but I'm going to like fully respect the process, but also just I enjoy this process. I enjoy seeing it. I enjoy
Whenever
watching
you're
it. I
ready, Mr.
enjoy
Lally.
learning about it. So
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name?
Sure, it's Erin O'Keefe, Okeefe,
And where is it that you live now?
West Bridgewater.
this is Paul's
And
wife.
who, if anyone, do you live there with?
I live with my husband, Paul, and our 2 girls.
And how long have you lived there in West Bridgewater?
Been 10 years this year.
And your girls, how old are your girls?
Now 13 and 10.
And what is your husband's name?
Paul.
And how long have you and Paul been together? How long have you been married?
It'll be 24 years this year and 17 years married this year.
And do you work, ma'am?
I do.
And what do you do for work?
Currently, I switch jobs. Currently, I work for a mechanical contractor.
And just sort of in general terms, what type of work is it that you do?
I'm their marketing director.
Okay, go off.
And you said you switched jobs. So how long have you been doing this sort of new job?
I'll be there 2 years in October.
And your husband, Paul, how does
Switching jobs ain't easy.
I was
I just
his
went through
waitress in a bar when he was in college.
And as far as your husband Paul is concerned, his parents, what are their names?
John and Margaret,
And your husband Paul, did he have any siblings?
2, an older sister and an older brother, John and Kristen.
And of the 3, John, Kristen, and Paul, who was the oldest, who was the youngest, and what was sort of the age difference between the 3?
Kristen was the oldest. Johnny was next, and Paul being the youngest. And Paul, 3 years younger than Johnny? 4.
And your sister-in-law, Kristen, she was the oldest, correct?
Mhm.
Was she married at some point?
Yes, her
Paul
husband
has
Steve.
Do you recall about when it
Lost
was that
2
your
siblings.
sister-in-law, Kristen, and Steve got married?
They got married in 2006.
His
And your sister-in-law,
niece and
Kristen, and her husband,
nephew
Steve, did they have any children?
lost
They did.
2 parents and a
Kaylee
guardian.
and Patrick.
And
A lot of
Kaylee
pain
and
in the
Patrick, about
family.
how
A
old
lot
were they?
of
Kaylee is 16 now, and Patrick is
disheartening
13 now.
Now, excuse me. At some point, did their last name was Furbush, is that correct?
Correct.
And at some point, did your sister-in-law, Kristen, her husband, Stephen, and their children move to the town of Canton?
They did.
And about what time or what year was that?
2009, 2010, I believe.
And if you know, where had they been living previously before they moved to Canton?
They were renting out their townhouse in Abington, so they were living in Dorchester with Johnny.
And if you know, at the time that they were living with Johnny, were both Patrick
very
and Kaylee
similar
born yet, or-
questions.
Just
You know,
Kaylee.
So fair
the
to say she was
kids.
relatively young at that point.
Yes.
Where were they living?
Now,
All
at some
the-
point, your sister-in-law, Kristen, got sick, correct?
Correct.
And do you recall when about that was that you learned of that?
It was June 2013, beginning of June.
And do you recall what she was sick from or what the diagnosis was?
She was diagnosed with glioblastoma.
And at some point subsequent to that, she passed. Is that correct?
Correct. 6 months later,
Sometime in fall, November of 2013.
November 11th, 2013.
Now, at that point in November of 2013, as far as you and the rest of your family was concerned, what was sort of plan or the expectation as far as what was going to happen with the children, Patrick and Kaylee?
I know that my in-laws were helping while Steve was still here. Steve passed away 2 months later, but my in-laws were helping Steve kind of get acclimated.
And what, if any, role did your brother-in-law, you called him Johnny, is that correct?
Yes.
So what, if any, role did your brother-in-law Johnny have with respect to the kids during this time?
He was very involved because he was very involved when my sister-in-law was sick. I think he was out on, he'd hurt his hand or something when he was working out on the when he was out on the streets, I guess. And so he was on disability and was helping and going to the hospital all the time and being with Kristen.
And you mentioned he was out on disability and that he was working. What was it that your brother-in-law, Johnny O'Keefe, what did he do for work?
He was a police officer in Boston.
Now, you mentioned
Yes,
that
are these
shortly
things
after
that
his
we
sister-in-law,
know?
Kristen passed away,
Yes,
her
of
husband
course,
Stephen also
but
passed away,
they
is that correct?
have to
Correct.
lay the foundation
What,
to
if
ask
anything,
more
sort of came to
questions,
plan, or
to
what
dive
happened with
deeper.
respect to niece and nephew following their father's death?
Opening statements is not evidence.
Paul and Johnny went out
Previous
to
knowledge
lunch
is not
one day,
evidence.
and
So
we had
they
kind of
have to
assumed
do it
because
all from the very
Johnny
beginning.
was out on, the streets doing his job like that Paul and I would take the kids, and Johnny said he was going to do it.
So he sort of volunteered or stepped up to do it, correct?
Correct.
And pursuant to that, where did Johnny go to live? Where did the kids live when he did it?
Johnny moved into their house in Canton, the original house that Steve and Kristen had bought. He moved in with the kids there.
And about how long was it that Johnny lived there with the kids before he assumed that role?
Maybe 4 years, 4 or 5 years. I don't remember the exact year that he bought the new house.
And so they lived there for 4 or 5 years, and then you mentioned that he bought a new house. Where was the new house that he bought?
The new house is the house now on Meadows Ave in Canton.
And so from whenever time Johnny bought that house, he lived there basically with the kids, Kaylee and Patrick, until he passed away as well, correct?
Correct.
And with respect to your niece and nephew, what, if any, sort of legal relationship did Johnny have with respect to the kids, Patrick?
He became their guardian.
And during the time that, from the time that your brother-in-law Johnny sort of took over that guardianship with respect to your niece and nephew, as far as dating was concerned, what, if any, sort of long-term relationships did you have during that period? Before you answer that, if I could just ask you for your definition as far as what do you deem or term as far as a long-term relationship?
1, 2 years, I guess, as a start, 2 years.
So during that time, after he assumed sort of guardianship of kids, how many of those relationships, 1 to 2 years or so, did Johnny have during that time?
2.
And what were the names of the people that he had those relationships with?
The first was Amy, and then Karen.
And just to be clear, by Amy, that was, where she lived, what town?
She resides in Westwood.
And,
Amy's
she
like,
had
don't
children
put
of her
me
own,
into
is that
this.
correct? And the second that you
Amy's like,
mentioned
I
was
didn't do
Karen, is that
nothing.
correct?
Correct.
What is Karen's last name?
Reed.
Just for clarity
When
purposes, do you see the person, you knew Karen Reed, correct?
Something
Yes.
So just for clarity purposes, for the
happened.
record, do you see Karen Reed in
and
the courtroom?
a
do.
trial
Just identify where as to where she's seated or an
follows.
article of clothing she's wearing.
In between
black or blue
all
blazer.
of that is
Just ask
discovery.
the record reflect the identification.
And
Yes.
they
Now,
will discover
with regard to Ms. Reed,
the
as far as
things.
her relationship with
they-
regard to your niece and nephew, what, if any, sort of
lawyers,
legal relationship did she
you
have
know,
with regard to your
prosecution,
niece and nephew
defense,
or to your
whatever,
brother-in-law, Johnny
they
O'Keefe?
will go back. They will
Legal,
get the
none.
information.
Now, as far as
Nothing is
over the
really
course,
off limits.
when was the first time that you recall meeting
The
defendant Ms.
details are important.
I believe it was in June
and
of
poor
2020
Amy
during
keeps
COVID.
Based
keeps
on
getting
sort of your
brought up.
understanding, when was that
I
in
don't
relation
think
to
she'll
when
be
they began sort of
brought up
relationship?
too often.
I think it
She's
was in February or
the
March
girlfriend
of that same
before
year.
that
So right around the time that the
she
pandemic
was
caused the
not,
sort of
in
general
my
shutdown,
opinion,
correct?
or knowledge
think so, yes.
involved. So I
Now,
don't see
as
her
far as
being
you were
brought up.
aware, did you know of any
so
sort of
much.
pre-existing relationship or any time that they had dated in the
But
past prior
she's
to
probably
that
like,
February,
stop
March
talking about
2020?
me.
I
I'm not
learned
in
that after the
this.
fact.
So fair to say
Just
during any
fair,
sort of
but-
previous time that they may or may not have dated, you had met Ms. Reed, you weren't aware
It
of her at all.
also goes
Correct.
to show
I had not met her.
And do you recall sort of where you
the
were, or what the
closeness of
circumstances were the
relationship
first time that you
between
met the defendant?
John O'Keefe,
I
his
believe
brother,
we
his
were
brother's
all
wife,
coming
knowledge
to
of
our house.
their relationship.
It was either,
you know,
it may have been a birthday party or Father's
They-
Day, but we were out on the patio. I think it was
went over to
June.
each other's houses. They had parties. They had,
So,
you know, they
John
were
O'Keefe, Ms.
close
Reed,
enough to
as well
share
as
that
the children
information.
came over to your house for some kind of holiday or something.
Correct.
so they would have the answers.
Now, from that time sort of going forward, how would you describe sort of your relationship with the defendant, Ms. Reed?
I liked her a lot.
And
Like
as far as
past tense.
prior to January 29th of 2022, would you consider yourself or characterize your relationship as friends?
I would.
And about how
Which
often,
is always nice
sort
to
of from
be
that
friends
time of when you first met her
with
in June of
your
2020
significant other,
through
sibling
January,
significant
the
other.
end of January 2022, how often
You're
would you
close
see
in age,
sort of your niece, your nephew,
3 years, you know.
Mr. O'Keefe, and/or Ms. Reed?
1-2 times a month. It was COVID, so when we could be outside or all get together, or if there was a birthday.
Right. Another aspect. It was during
And were there any
COVID,
occasions where
so
you
safety is key.
would have
All of
occasion
them
to
had
spend time
children
with or
around
hang out
them
with
of
the
varying
defendant
ages.
outside of
So safety
either
was
your
very
husband
important.
or your brother-in-law, John O'Keefe?
Yes, and we talked quite often.
And just in regard to sort of in person, about how many times was that?
Without them, I don't recall.
Now, as far
That's
as
fair.
your understanding of sort of the living arrangement around it, how often, what was your understanding as far as the relationship and sort of where everybody lived or where everybody stayed or how often things like that?
I believe that Karen was there most times. I do know that she liked to go home on Mondays just to kind of have a fresh time by herself. And Thursdays, she was teaching an online class. So she would be home on Thursdays as well. But for the majority of the time, I believe she was over there.
That's fair. She
Now,
wasn't married.
Just to be clear,
They
when you
weren't
say over there, you
married.
mean the
John
house on
and
Meadows?
Correct.
When you say she
and
was
Karen,
home,
they weren't
where else
married.
did she have a home during that time?
In
She
Mansfield.
had her own home.
And had you had occasion to be over her house in Mansfield?
Things
at any
need to
point
be
in time
taken
that you
care of
were
at home
friends?
too. So
I had gone over once, yes.
Now, with respect to their relationship, what, if anything, were you aware of as far as fights, arguments, issues, anything like that?
I think normal relationship, the stuff everyone goes through.
right.
If I could ask you just if you could expound upon that a little as far as when you say normal relationship stuff, what exactly do you mean?
I know that, my in-laws being there often could be stressful.
Mm.
And,
That's fair.
two people with kids and life, normal everyday relationship.
She's like, I don't
Now,
know, but I
during
know
this
that
time frame,
it wasn't always
you were living in
peachy
West
and
Bridgewater
lovely.
still, is that correct?
Correct.
And where
You know,
were you, like what
They're
town were you
adults.
working
They
in?
can disagree
time, I was working in
and
Brighton.
converse about it.
So fair to say, relatively long commute between Brighton and West Bridgewater on a daily basis?
Correct.
And so during that sort of long commute, what, if anything, would you do with reference to the defendant, or who, if anyone, would you typically talk to on those long commutes?
I would text her or call her and say, I'm hey and driving, or she would call me and we would just shoot the breeze and just talk.
Was that something, how often would you do that?
Girlfriends.
Quite often.
Now, as far as your relationship with the defendant, Ms. Reed, you considered yourself friends or friendly, is that correct?
Correct.
Was that something that you communicated to her, or she communicated to you in any way?
Yeah. And yeah, we would say how well we got along, and she would say if they ever broke up, she hoped that she and I would stay friends.
I think friends and being friendly is two different things.
Now,
But I think
Mrs.
probably
O'Keefe, if I could turn
women
your
would probably
attention to
differentiate
January
between
28th,
the two a lot
2022
with
into
a
January 29th,
stronger
2000.
slash than like a man. Yeah, we're friendly. Yeah, we're friends.
Actually,
I feel like
let
two
me
women would probably be like,
bring it back a little bit
friendly.
further. So
or
New
we're
Year's
friends.
Eve, going from 2021 into 2022. Do you recall that time frame?
I do.
Do you recall where you were or who you were with around that time of New Year's?
We were in Aruba for my mother's birthday.
Okay, so New Year's,
And,
Aruba
when you say
trip.
we, who, if anyone, were you in Aruba with?
My mother, father, sister, husband, and our 2 girls.
And over the course of that, were you also aware of where your brother-in-law, Johnny O'Keefe, and Miss Reed, and
Johnny
children, Patrick
O'Keefe.
and Kaylee, were at that time as well?
They were also in Aruba.
And so where
Big
they were
Aruba
situated in
family
Aruba,
trip.
where was that in relation to where you were situated?
We weren't close. You'd need a cab. It was not the other side of the island, but far enough away you'd need to catch a cab. They were more downtown.
And what, if anything, did you know about sort of who they were with or how they had come to be there in Aruba?
They were with a large group of people.
Ooh,
I
not a family
don't
trip.
know how many, but there was a large group of people that was going down.
Just a
And as far as you
coinky
knew, was there any one person, excuse me, in particular that organized sort of that trip? Or
Yes, Laura Sullivan.
and do you know Laura Sullivan?
I do.
And how do you know Laura Sullivan?
I know Laura through Johnny. He's her son's godfather.
And let's say, as far as you knew, that Mr. O'Keefe, Johnny O'Keefe, and Laura Sullivan had known each other for some time.
Correct.
Now, at any point when you were in Aruba,
Need more
during-
information
around
about
the time
this
of
Aruba
New
trip.
Year's, did you ever meet up with or connect with Miss Reed and Johnny O'Keefe?
We did not.
Now, at some point in time when you were in Aruba during that same time frame, what, if any, conversation did you have with Miss Reed and the family?
I don't believe any with Johnny. Karen texted me on the flight down. The flight attendants were
Johnny.
Karen and Erin, and we were trying to arrange and see if there was a time we could get together.
Were the flight attendants on their flight down had the same names as both yourself and Miss Reed?
Yeah, she texted me and said that.
And so you had been trying to arrange some time or some day to sort of meet up. Is that correct?
I don't know. I don't recall. I had texted her on New Year's Eve to see where they were.
And what, if anything, did she reply? Did she reply in text?
She did. It wasn't until later in the evening that she had caught Johnny kissing Laura's sister in the lobby of the hotel.
And what, if
Johnny
anything,
kissing
further did
Laura's
she
sister.
indicate to you in regards to that?
Just that they got into an argument about it.
And so did the two of you invited to, I mean, sort of the two groups of families, did you ever connect or meet up at any point when you were in Aruba? Do
We did not.
you have any further conversation with Ms. Reed in reference to what she had indicated occurred at their resort?
I responded and said, like, kissing, and I don't recall what her response was, but I had missed the next text. She said did I want to meet up? She had freshened up and did I want to meet up? But I had missed it and was either already going to bed or just missed it until the next day.
That's fair.
But she had indicated to you via text that they had got into an argument and then further indicated or asked you if you wanted to meet up, correct?
Correct.
All right, Ms. Tallali, I'm just going to give a brief instruction at this point. All right, excuse me. So, folks, you just heard testimony about statements that were allegedly made by the defendant. You're really not to use the statements for the truth, but you can consider them solely on the limited purpose of the defendant's state of mind and as they go to the nature of the relationship between the defendant and John O'Keefe. Thank you.
Basically,
Now,
she's saying,
between that time in Aruba
where's
and
the
January
objection?
28th of 2022, had you had occasion to meet
Where's
up
the
with
objection?
Johnny O'Keefe and or the defendant Karen Reed or the kids or anybody from that Canton house?
No, our older daughter tested positive and she and Paul had to stay back in Aruba. So we didn't have, and then by the time they got back, it was back to school and we didn't have a chance.
So your oldest daughter was quarantined along with your husband in Aruba and they came back sometime after you and your younger daughter?
Correct.
And with respect to that, that sort of weekend of January 28th and January 29th, what, if any, plans did you have initially to meet up with your brother-in-law, Johnny, and the defendant?
Johnny had been communicating to Paul that wanted to get us together on the 29th. And I said, there's a big storm coming. I don't think that's going to happen.
And so you were aware somehow of a big storm coming in on that weekend as far as the 29th was concerned?
Correct.
And what, if anything, do you recall sort of about what you were aware of as far as that storm, like how severe, what kind of storm?
I don't recall specifics, but I knew that it was a big storm that was coming for Saturday with a lot of snow.
And so you didn't think that was a good idea to set up a time to meet up with that?
Correct.
Now, on that date of January 28th, what, if any, conversation did you have with Ms. Reed on that day?
She had texted me while I was waiting for the school bus, asking if there was any chance I was out without Paul.
Was that a typical thing that she would text you as far as the without Paul part?
No.
And you indicated that you were waiting for the school bus, is that right?
Correct.
And at that time in January of 2022, you had two daughters, correct?
Yes, correct.
Were they sort of on the same school as far as on the same bus?
No, they were not. They're separate schools.
So fair to say one was maybe in elementary, one was in middle school.
Correct.
So as far as around that time that you received the text, would that have been the younger daughter or the older daughter that you were waiting for?
The younger daughter. It was after 3:00.
And who comes home, or at that time, who came home first, the younger daughter or the older?
Our older daughter.
Older daughter.
And when you received that text from the defendant, what, if anything, how did you respond to it?
I said that I was waiting for the school bus and we had basketball on Friday nights.
Right, busy.
And
Busy
the
on
basketball on
Fridays.
Friday nights, was that something that was one of your daughters or both?
Both.
And do you recall, well, let me ask you this, with regard to your daughter's basketball, at least at that time, what, if any, sort of relationship did your husband have to those basketballs?
He was the coach for both of them.
And was that something that was sort of like a local league, is that correct?
Town league.
And
Did all of you, and by all I mean yourself, your husband, and the two girls, did you all go to both games that night?
Correct.
And do you recall about what time those games were?
6 or 7.
Yeah,
Now,
that's just about what Paul
Ms.
said.
Reed reached out to you and texted
He probably
you, and
knows
then you
the time better because he's
responded as you described. What, if any, further conversation did you have with Ms. Reed on that day?
I asked her if everything was okay, if something was up, and she responded and said, "Just another day. I wish I didn't talk to an O'Keefe after 2004."
And how did you respond to that?
Ooh,
I
wait a
said,
minute.
"What happened? What's
Wait
going
a minute. Let's just go back real quick to that. Let's just go back real quick, just real quick. Ooh, okay, Karen. Hey, let's just go back real quick.
On that day.
I asked her if everything was okay, if something was up,
Right.
and
as you
she
do.
responded and said, "Just another day. I wish I didn't talk to an O'Keefe after 2004."
Just another day. I wish I didn't talk to an
And how did you
O'Keefe
respond
after
to that?
2004.
I said, "What happened? What's going on?" And they had bickered, I guess, about her taking Kaylee to Dunkin' Donuts in the morning before school.
And just to be clear, when you say they, you
Not the
mean
Duncan.
Johnny O'Keefe and Karen.
Correct.
Do you
Wow.
recall
Okay.
sort of how that conversation evolved, or what, if anything, else was said during that time?
But I mean, like you say,
I just knew that they had
saying things
gotten
isn't illegal.
into some type, I don't know if it was an
not
argument
always.
or
Sometimes
there was something. They bickered about her taking them, and he said that she spoiled them.
she spoiled them. They deserve to be spoiled. They deserve to be spoiled in a healthy way. They deserve to be spoiled.
Now, as
They
far
lost their
as
mom and dad.
your conversation with Ms. Reed in regards to the weekends, what, if anything, did the two of you talk about as far as sort of plans for the weekend?
I said I was anticipating a storm, so was probably going to hang in the neighborhood with everybody.
Right. Like we're not just like opting to
Now,
go
as
out.
far as
in a
later on in that
storm,
afternoon,
blizzard.
what, if any, sort of further communication did you receive from Ms. Reed that day?
I think the last text was a picture, something that popped up in her memories of my
I
children
did not even
and
realize you guys couldn't see me.
Kaylee and Patrick from the Cape that summer, and said, "This just popped up in my memories and made me smile."
Now, did you have occasion to talk with Ms. Reed any further on that day, the 28th?
No, that was it.
And so you went to your kids' basketball games, came back to your house, is that correct?
Correct.
And do you recall about what time you went to bed that night?
It was either close to midnight or after, because Paul and I were sitting up watching TV,
Do you recall what you were watching on TV?
Yellowstone.
That's fair.
Was that sort of a binge watch that you were doing?
Yes.
It's okay to smile. You're allowed to
Before
smile
you
at the
went to
good
bed,
memories.
did you have
Okay.
occasion to sort of, knowing
Even
that
though
the snow
something
was
bad is
coming,
happening
have
and
occasion
you're
to
on
sort
the
of look out
witness,
and
and
any
you're okay. It's
observations
okay to
about
smile.
what the
You're
weather
allowed
was
to
like before you went
enjoy
to bed?
those things.
I noted that while we were still up watching television that it was snowing already.
And did you have occasion to see whether or not it was sort of sticking to the pavement or the grass or anything like that?
I looked out on the deck and it was starting to accumulate on the deck, sticking to the deck.
You know about what time
Meaning
that
it was cold enough for
Probably
it.
around 10:30 or 11.
And this is at your house in West Bridgewater.
Correct.
Now, you go to bed and at some point you wake up on the 29th. And if you recall, what is it that wakes you up the next morning?
I want to see a map. I want to see a
woke
map.
up to my husband on the phone with his mother saying he's going to be okay. He's going to be okay.
I want to see a
And
map of the
They got
storm
off the
path.
phone and I said, "What happened? And what's going
House
on?"
to
And he
house.
said they found Johnny in the snow this morning.
And after that phone call, what is it that your husband called you?
He's pacing around and he goes to the bathroom to brush his teeth because he said that he was going to drive to the hospital.
And do you know what hospital he was going to drive to?
Exactly
Good
what he said.
Samaritan.
And based on the weather and sort of the road conditions, what, if any, concerns did you have about that plan of your husband's?
I was concerned with him driving because the roads weren't good.
That's fair.
Now, as far as your in-laws, so your father-in-law is John O'Keefe Jr., is that correct?
Senior.
And your mother-in-law is Margaret or Peggy O'Keefe? is that
Correct.
And what, if any, information did you have as far as were they going to the hospital, and if so, how were they there?
They were going to the hospital and Carrie Roberts was going to pick them up because they didn't have a car that could drive in the snow.
Now, was Carrie Roberts someone that you knew prior to this date?
I knew her from when Johnny moved to Canton.
Okay.
And at some points, do you recall approximately
Well-
how long was it between the time that the phone call comes in and the time that your husband left your house?
we'll fully learn the Carrie relationship
10 minutes.
soon.
Relatively quick. I'm sorry, just have to.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. So then, when your husband is leaving, what, if any, similar to earlier, the previous evening, what, if any, observations did you make as sort of the weather and what was going on outside of the time?
It was snowing when he was leaving. Heavy.
Heavy snow. We
Now,
saw the heavy
At some
snow
point,
in the previous video.
you're at home
with
and
the
your children are at
snowblower.
home with you, is that correct?
Correct.
And at some point, who, if anyone, do you reach out to sort of find out what's going on?
When Paul was brushing his teeth, I said to him, "Where's Karen? Where is she? Is she okay?" And I called her, and I could hear the phone pick up, and she didn't say hello. I just said, "Karen, what the hell is going on?" And she just yelled back in the phone, "John's dead." And Carrie Roberts grabbed the phone from her and said, "No, he's not. He's at the hospital. They're working on him." And I didn't know what was going on.
Okay. Okay.
Was there any further conversation on that initial phone call that you made to?
They were in Carrie's car waiting for an ambulance to pick up Karen. And then Carrie was going to pick up my in-laws.
Okay. Oh, hearing that
As far as sort of going through that day,
must have been
what was the next turn?
the worst.
As
Yeah,
far
absolutely.
as your brother-in-law Johnny and who did you learn from?
When I spoke to Carrie in the car, I asked her to take my phone number. I knew she was going to the hospital and I was nervous that Paul was going to be there by himself. So I asked her to please keep me informed as to what was happening when she got there.
right. And she,
without any
it's
reference to
snowing out.
anything
She's not
Roberts
going
may
to
or may not have said to you. Did you
put her
further
kids at
updates
risk
from
in
Ms.
trying to
Roberts
drive in
throughout,
it as
the
well.
course of that morning?
I think I
We're gonna
called her
take that
every
into
5 minutes.
consideration.
And at some point, did you learn what sort of the status was in regards to John?
I think it was, I don't recall the exact time, but Carrie had texted me or called me to let me know when they were finally called in by the doctors from the emergency room.
And what, if anything, did you learn once they've been called in by the doctor?
All right, sustained.
At some point later on in that day, did you have further conversation with the defendant?
I did.
And do you remember
Is
approximately
1.5
what
going to
time?
be too fast?
I think it was around 1 o'clock.
And if you recall, was that a situation where you called her or she called you? Or
I called her because I didn't know what was going on. And I kept saying to my husband, "Has anyone checked on Karen? Is Karen okay?" So I called her.
and when you called her, what, if any, conversation did you have with her at that time?
She answered the phone and said that I was on speaker and she was in the car with her dad and they were driving to Dighton.
And what, if any, questions did you ask her about what had happened and what, if anything, did she say?
I asked her, I said, "What the hell happened last night?"
Right.
And because I couldn't understand first how they were together if they had been arguing earlier in the day. And she told me that they were out, that she dropped him at a party afterwards, didn't feel like going, so dropped him and went back to Canton.
Okay.
What, if anything, did she say occurred after dropping John off?
She said she went back to Canton and I think woke up around 4:30 and couldn't find him and woke up Kaylee to see if Kaylee had heard from him at all.
What, if anything, did she say happened after that?
She said that she went to go out and look, but the roads were bad, so went back and called Carrie and Jen so that they could drive together.
By Carrie, you understood that to mean Carrie Roberts.
Carrie Roberts,
And by Jen, who, if anyone, did you understand that?
Jen McCabe.
Is that someone that you knew or were familiar with at that time?
I had never met Jen.
Okay. Never met
And
Jen.
what, if anything, did she say happened after that when she went out with Carrie and Jen?
I don't, is it possible to refresh my memory on that?
Oh, she's learning.
Without getting into that, just as far as beyond sort of what happened, what, if anything, else?
It's okay to not remember.
It's you as far as
She told me that she had to remember the bad times, which struck me as an odd comment to say, but I assumed since she was at the hospital that maybe she was medicated, but it just struck me as something odd.
now, in addition to the having to remember the bad times, what, if anything, else did she say to you at that point during that phone call?
She said, "I don't think I'm ever going to see you guys again." And I said, "Of course you will. We're friends."
Now, following
didn't even think that it was
that conversation,
that
that
Karen
day,
was at fault.
did you ever speak with the defendant, Karen Reed, again?
No.
May I have one moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Just one last question, ma'am. So, in regard to those last two statements that you had testified about, was that all
Hey,
part
Ray.
and parcel of the same
What's going on?
conversation when the defendant indicated she was driving back with her father to Dighton?
Correct.
So there was no further conversation after that conversation shortly after 1 p.m.?
No.
Okay. I have nothing further for this witness, Your Honor.
All right. Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. We have no questions.
All right, Ms. O'Keefe, you're all set. Thank you.
Okay, Aaron is done on
Mr.
the
Lally, the next
stand.
witness.
Yes, Your Honor. Commonwealth will call Officer Stephen Sarif to the stand.
Okay, and the first police officer is being called for the prosecution. Hey, Ray, what is going on? We've had two witnesses so far and opening statements from both sides. Previous to that, the first two witnesses were Paul O'Keefe and Aaron O'Keefe, which was John's brother and John's brother's wife. We got some brief history on John's relationship with Amy, but also, most importantly, with Karen. A little info on the Aruba trip on New Year's.
You can sit or
which
stand, whatever you want to do.
all were coincidentally in
Just ask that you speak
Aruba.
into the microphone, please. Okay, whenever
Now
you're ready,
this is
Mr. Lally.
our last
afternoon.
witness of
Good afternoon.
Could
day
you
one.
please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
My name is Officer
There
Sarif,
is
SARAF, Canton Police Department.
And how long have you been a member of the Canton Police Department?
About 27 years.
Now, were you working with the Canton Police Department on January
just like
28th into January 29th,
50,
2020?
45
I
minutes
was.
left,
You
but I'm
recall,
at
what shift you were working on
1.5
that case?
I
speed.
was working midnight to 8
because I got to
shift.
be done at 2.
Midnight to 8 a.m., is that correct?
That's correct.
And were you dispatched to a call at approximately 6:05 a.m.?
Yes, I was.
And if you recall, what was the dispatch in regard to and where specifically were you dispatched to?
It was a call of a person that was unconscious outside, I believe it was 34 Fairview Road in Canton.
Now, that particular area of Canton, are you familiar with that area of Canton?
Yes.
And as far as the town of Canton is concerned with respect to police department, is there any sort of different sectors within the town that you would be assigned to control?
That's correct.
And the area of Fairview Road, would that be within your sector that you
Yes,
typically
yes.
control?
That was West Sector.
And how many sectors within the town of Canton are
4.
there? Now, that particular area of Fairview Road, what type of area is that? Is it residential, commercial, or something?
It's residential.
And the roadway of Fairview Road, there's houses on that roadway, is that correct?
That's correct.
Is there any sort of, it's a paved roadway, is that correct?
It is. Yes.
It'd be lanes, are they divided by any sort of lines in the middle of it?
Yes.
And who, if anyone, owns or maintains that particular road?
The town of Canton does.
Now, you received that dispatch. Where were you, if you recall, when you received the dispatch?
I was, there's a church right next to the police station. I was in that parking lot.
And with respect to the evening of the 28th into the morning of the 29th, what, if anything, were you aware of as far as sort of forecast of the weather or anything sort of pending coming?
No, it was snowing pretty good that night. It was a snowstorm that evening.
So there's a snowstorm that had been predicted, is that correct?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. There was a snowstorm actually occurring around that time, just after 6 a.m.
That's correct.
And at the time that you're responding, a little after 6 a.m., was light out, dark out, or something?
It was dark out.
And the time, if you know, how much time elapsed sort of between the time that you received the call and the time that you arrived in that area of Fairview?
It's pretty close, so a couple of minutes maybe, because I didn't obviously go as fast as you could go because the roads were pretty snowy.
During the course of, you've been working sort of since midnight, correct?
Correct.
And over the course of your work throughout that evening, had you, or what, if anything, had you noticed with regard to snow removal as far as town plows or anything like that?
I don't understand. Were they plowing? Is that your question? They usually they were plowing the roads.
So there have been
Let
some
him-
sort of treatment or plowing.
Wait, if you have a question about the question, let him rephrase it.
Yes.
What were sort of the road conditions or the visibility or anything like that, if you recall, during your response time?
It was snowing pretty well. The roads were definitely slippery. It took me a while to get to the destination.
And if you recall, sir, what was sort of the path of travel that you took from, you mentioned you were in a church parking lot next to the police station, correct?
That's
I
correct.
am
Where's the
one
police
day
station
behind
located?
trial.
Police
We are
station's on
finishing
Washington
up
Street, 1492 Wash.
the last
And so
witness
what was sort
of
of the path
day
of travel that you
one.
took from the church lot next to
I
the
do
police
have it on
station to
1.5
So I went
speed.
past the police station onto Chapman Street,
Sorry.
and then
We're just trying to catch up.
from Chapman Street. I went to
And I
Fairview
got to be
Road.
done at 1.
And
So if it's a little too fast,
when you were
feel
approaching
free to let
Fairview
me
Road, you're
know.
taking a
If
right
you
or left?
are new
So
here,
right.
which like everyone is,
And,
this is a
as
brand new
you
channel of
were taking
mine.
that right onto
Feel free
Fairview,
to
what, if anything,
subscribe. I will be back
happened with
tomorrow
the
with
vehicles
day
you were taking out?
2. By the end of Friday, we'll
Nothing
be
that I
all
know.
caught up. So next
And
Monday,
that particular, coming from
we will
that
be
Chapman side
right
of
on
Fairview,
time.
Fairview
But I just
goes
had
from
to start a
Chapman and
day
then it
late.
goes
I'm
down to
sorry.
sort of, let's say, the bottom of the street. It connects with
We're
another
not
street.
gonna
Is that
miss
correct?
any.
That's correct.
And what is the street that's?
Cedar Crest?
And if you're coming from the Chapman side down to the Cedar Crest side, what, if anything, is there as far as an elevation? Like, is it uphill, downhill, or flat?
It's it's down a hill, really decent sized hill.
I'm not familiar with the area.
And as you
So street names mean
are
nothing to
driving down
me.
Fairview, what, if
Downhill,
anything,
uphill
you mentioned
with
it was dark
snow
outside,
does mean
That's correct.
something to me,
what, if
though.
anything, beyond sort of the headlights on your cruiser,
The
did you
jury
utilize,
probably familiar with the
for
area.
assistance as you were driving down Fairview?
I had a spotlight on the driver's side, a handheld spotlight to try to locate the house in question.
And if I could just ask you a little bit about the type of vehicle that you were driving. So was it, what kind of police cruiser were you driving?
It's an Explorer.
So SUV, is that right?
Yes, SUV, yes.
And as far as those, or the particular
needed
cruiser
him to
that you
say
were
SUV
driving on
because I
that
don't know.
occasion, what, if anything, is it equipped with as far as cameras or anything like that within the vehicle?
Yeah, it's equipped with a camera for front and back, and in the rear seat of the cruiser.
And so
Okay.
as you're driving down Fairview,
Cameras.
you reach out and start to utilize
Covered.
your spotlight sort of on, where is that located on the cruiser?
It's on my left-hand side,
And is that spotlight that's outside of the cruiser or inside the cruiser? Where is it located
on the outside of the cruiser, but there's a handle that manipulates it so you can point the spotlight where you want to go.
So you have some sort of tool within the cruiser where you can manipulate where it points.
That's correct.
Because same. That's exactly
And
what
as
I
you're
would do
coming
to
down,
explain it.
Fairview,
That
utilizing
makes
that spotlight, what,
completely
if anything,
sense.
do you observe out front?
Well, as I got to my destination, I saw 3 people on the lawn of in the snow, waving at me.
And initially, when you see these 3 people in the snow, do you have any idea sort of who they are, or male, female, anything like that?
There were 3 women, and I later learned it was a male subject on the ground.
And so when you initially are sort of approaching or getting to the residence, you indicate you see the 3 women waving at you. Could you see,
Three
what, if
women.
anything, could you see the body at that point?
I saw that there was somebody on the ground. Yes,
So you could see the 3 women and you could see a person on the ground.
that's correct.
And at some point, subsequent to this, did you learn the identity of the person on the ground?
I did.
And who did you learn that
John
person?
O'Keefe.
And prior to this dispatch, did you know John O'Keefe anyway?
No.
Now, the 3 females that you saw sort of around Mr. O'Keefe's body on the ground, at some point later, did you subsequently identify who those 3 people were?
I did.
And who did you identify?
One was Karen Reed. The other one was Miss McCabe and Miss Robertson.
All right, sir, I'm going to ask you to keep your voice up, okay, or speak into the microphone.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Now,
Yes.
you arrive on scene and I'm assuming you get out of your cruiser, is that correct?
That's correct.
Karen,
What, if anything,
Jen,
did you do
and
from there?
Carrie.
I walked over to the scene.
there.
I first asked, is this person a drug user? He's have an issue with drugs. Somebody said, no, he's a Boston police officer. I said, okay. I checked for a pulse. I couldn't find a pulse. Then I went back to my cruiser and tried to find the AED, which is an automated external defibrillator.
Back just for a second. So you indicated that you checked for a pulse, correct?
That's correct.
And where on Mr. O'Keefe did you check for?
On his neck, it's carotid.
So if it's
Okay.
carotid, is that correct?
That's correct.
And when
Did you
made
test him under the
contact with
armpit
sort
for
of the
body
skin area in his carotid area on his neck?
That was from a
What, if
different
anything, did you
trial.
observe as
That
far
was
as
wild.
Mr. O'Keefe when you did?
I couldn't find any pulse or anything like that, and he was cold to the touch.
Now, when you did this, Mr. O'Keefe, you mentioned, was sort of on the ground, correct?
That's correct.
And how was he sort of positioned on the ground?
He was laying on his back.
And as far as
On
your
his back.
observations of Mr. O'Keefe during this initial time when you're checking the pulse, what, if anything, did you observe sort of on him or around him or anything like that?
Snow?
I didn't really.
Let me ask it a different one. So as far as you mentioned that when you arrived there, it was snowing,
Red
correct?
glass?
Correct.
From a tail
And so
light?
how much snow was in and around or on top of Mr. O'Keefe when you first observed?
It was about, I would say about 6 inches on the ground.
Okay.
There was a light dusting on top of him, I would say.
Oh.
And what, if any, observations did you make of Mr. O'Keefe? and
Light
sort of how he was
dusting on
dressed at
top
this
of
time
him?
initially that you
They,
observed?
I don't recall what he was
covered him.
wearing.
Now, with reference to the residence at 34 Fairview Road, if you're standing in front of the house on the street facing the house, which side of the property was Mr. O'Keefe lying on his back?
As you're facing the house, it's to the, I'm sorry, go again. Can you say that again, please?
So if you're standing on the street facing the house, was Mr. O'Keefe more to the center of the property, the right of the property, or the left?
He was on the left of the property, yes.
left
Now,
of
in
the
addition to Mr.
property.
O'Keefe, in this sort of area on the left side of the property, what, if any, sort of other landmarks or other things that you observe on that side of the property?
To the left of the property, there was a fire hydrant, a bush, and a flagpole, I believe.
Okay.
To the left, to the farther left, like more near the property line, I would say.
Now, with reference to, you mentioned that there was snowing out and there was snow on the ground, correct?
That's correct.
What, if anything else, did you note as far as the weather conditions, as far as wind, temperature, or anything like that?
I would say it was near blizzard conditions. It was snowing really, really hard.
Near
how
blizzard
cold-
conditions.
Obviously, January is snowing out, it was cold, but how cold was it, if you know, when you first left?
less than 32 degrees. I don't know exactly. It's cold.
If
So you
it's
pull up in that
snowing, it's
area
most
with
likely
two
less than
females.
32
Are they to your right or to your left?
I pulled up, basically, I had my cruiser straight on.
And
Right.
so which side of the cruiser were the three females and Mr. O'Keefe when you pull up and stop?
We're straight ahead.
Straight ahead. And-
A little to the left.
And what, if any, other vehicles did you observe sort of in the roadway in that area where three females were and Mr. O'Keefe?
There was another vehicle in the roadway on the side of the road. I parked basically right behind that.
What type?
And do you recall anything about that vehicle?
was
Like what
it?
type it was, what
I
color,
don't.
or anything like that?
I don't recall.
Now, with regard to the three females you identified as Ms. Reed, Ms. McCabe, and Ms. Roberts, you recall where they were in relation to Mr. O'Keefe, each of them, when you first sort of pull up and get out of your cruiser?
So when I arrived, I saw Miss Reed looked like she was giving CPR to him, and she had blood on her face.
Now, in addition to yourself, there are other sort of first responders that have dispatched to the scene as well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And of them, who, if anyone else, was on scene at the time that you arrived?
When I arrived, I was the first to arrive. Then there was Officer Mulaney that came a few minutes later, and then the fire department came after him, and I believe Sergeant Good came within that. I don't know how many minutes, but it was pretty close.
You're first to arrive on scene, and then Mulaney comes a couple minutes later.
Yes,
About how long was it between when Officer Mulaney arrives and when the fire department arrives?
a couple minutes. I don't.
And at some point after that, a Sergeant Good comes. Is that
That's correct.
Sergeant Good is a sergeant with your department.
That is correct.
Now, the fire department, when they arrived, do you recall what type of apparatus they had that arrived on scene?
I believe it was an engine. They usually come with an engine and an ambulance.
So, to your recollection, it was at least an ambulance and an engine.
Yeah. Yes.
When you were in transit, sort of coming from the church parking lot next to the station, 234 Fairview,
Medical,
what, if
emergency
anything,
medical
did you have
professional.
activated on your cruiser as far as lights or sirens or anything like that?
I believe I might have my blue lights on.
An array of skill
I'm not
sets
sure.
are going
As far
to
as the
show
time
up.
that you're coming,
Especially
shortly
if they
after 6
hear
a.m.
it is a
was there,
stop.
what, if any, sort of other vehicular traffic did you observe en route from church parking lot to 34 Fairview?
There wasn't any that I can recall.
Because it was a near blizzard out. People weren't
So you
driving.
go to get your AED device from your cruiser, is that correct?
That's correct.
And around that time that you're retrieving that, what happens?
The FD, the fire department, came on scene, and they took over care of Mr. O'Keefe.
Fire department.
Now, beyond sort of
EMTs.
just checking pulse, as far as around that time when you were checking the pulse in the carotid area for Mr. O'Keefe, what, if any, other observations did you make with regard to any injuries or anything else on Mr. O'Keefe?
But when I first got there, he had blood on his face, and it was just wiped away. So that's the only.
He had blood on his
So there was
face.
blood on his face that was wiped away.
That's correct.
Wiped away blood on his face.
Now, when the fire department arrives on scene and they sort of take over resuscitative efforts,
Where was the
regarding Mr. O'Keefe, is that correct?
origination
And the person you identified
of the
as,
blood?
Ms. Reed, firstly, do you see that person in the courtroom today?
I do.
Could you just identify us where she's seated or not?
Sitting at the table right there, black.
Not just ask record reflect identification. Of the witness.
Yes.
After the fire department arrived and they sort of take over resuscitative efforts with regard to Mr. O'Keefe, what, if any, observations did you make of Ms. Reed and what she was doing or saying at that?
Ms. Reed was visibly upset. She kept saying, "This is all my fault. This is my fault. I did this," and she was very hysterical.
This is all my fault.
And she kept asking,
I did this.
He's dead. Is he dead? Is he dead?"
Is he dead? Is he
And with
dead?
that
Is he
specific
dead?
phraseology, that's something that she kept saying?
Yes,
And by your repetitive nature, I'm assuming it was something that she said more than once. Correct?
several times. Correct.
Several
And when she's
times.
saying this, can you describe
I
sort of
want
how
it on
she's saying this?
camera.
I mean, is it a whisper? Is it a scream? Or is it something?
She was yelling pretty good.
Feeling pretty good.
And with regard to her repetitive
Exclaiming
questions, as far
fault.
as,
Was she
is
drunk? How
dead,
drunk
what,
was
if any
she?
response did you provide to her in regard to that?
I just said they're doing the best that they can. I don't
We
know.
know drinks were involved the night before. Well, within the 12-hour.
Now, at some point,
It's like a
did you
dream.
direct Ms. Reed, the defendant, to somewhere else away from Mr. O'Keefe?
Yeah,
This
I
is
tried to get her out of
the,
the elements. I put her in a car. I don't know if it was my cruiser or another cruiser there, but I had her sit in the back seat just to get out of the snow.
This is the first
And
cop
did
on the
she stay in
scene.
that cruiser for any?
She stayed in for a few minutes, and then she was like up and down, up and down.
So sort of in and out of whatever car you put her into.
That's correct.
Dude,
When she
Chris,
was
you
out of
look
the
like
car,
a
where was she
dream.
She was just walking around, from what I remember.
This dweeb.
Now, with reference to Mr. O'Keefe, he's laying on his back on the ground. That location, where was that in relation to the roadway of Fairview?
I would say about 20 feet off the road.
So if it's 20 feet off the road, is it fair to say that was on sort of the front lawn of 34 Fairview?
Yes, that's correct.
And At some point,
I
the fire
know, I
department takes Mr. O'Keefe's body off of the lawn. Is that correct?
Aw.
And where were you in
No, with that
relation
new
to Mr.
haircut
O'Keefe on that?
though.
I don't remember.
And
New
from,
haircut looks
if
so
you don't
good.
remember, do you recall anything about sort of what the ground looked like when Mr. O'Keefe was lifted up?
I don't recall. I didn't.
Now, that area around where Mr. O'Keefe was, when you initially come up, you see him on the ground and you check for the pulse. If anything, did you note around Mr. O'Keefe's body as far as the condition of or disturbance of the snow around?
I noticed that there
I
were
see the numbers gone up a little
footprints and
bit.
track marks around the body
Just so
itself.
everyone
There was
knows,
none
it
coming
is
from the
at
residents.
1.5 speed. It's gotta be done
or
at
the
2.
area. It was just right around the body itself.
Other than that, this is the
And so,
final witness, and there's just a little
The
bit left.
position that Mr.
of
O'Keefe
it.
is lying on his back on
And
the
then
lawn,
we'll be done
Correct.
for
Is
day
his
1,
head closer
a
to
day
the
behind.
house or the
But
street or?
we're
I believe
gonna
the head
get
was,
caught up
closest to the house.
if you're new.
And the footprints that you're talking about, was that
We will
between
be streaming Friday to
his
catch
feet
up
and the
on
street
the
or
day I'm behind.
above his head, or where was it in relation to?
Basically all around him because people were walking around him.
And as far as beyond sort of the immediate area above his head, between his head and the house, what if any footprints, or what if any disturbance in snow did you observe?
I didn't see any.
No disturbances behind his head. Okay.
Now, Officer Saraf, about how long was it that you were on scene?
I want to say about an hour and a half.
And at some point, the fire department transports Mr. O'Keefe from the scene. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And do you know to what facility he was transported to?
I don't recall where they went.
And after
Probably
Mr.
wouldn't.
O'Keefe was taken away by the fire department, as far as the 3 females, Ms. Reed, Ms. McCabe, and Ms. Roberts, do you know where they went or what they did following that?
They, after talking to Sergeant Good, they left in their car. I don't know where they went. The car that was there, they left.
Now, at any point in the time that you were on scene before they left, did you have any conversation with any of the 3 of them?
I asked them, where were they? What happened? And what were they doing?
And
Right.
who specifically?
What? Why
did you
is
talk to?
there?
Well, I asked
Why is this
Ms. Reed, and she couldn't really tell me too much about what happened. Ms. McCabe said that they were drinking in a couple bars downtown.
Let me just stop you before, as far as, so just sticking with Ms. Reed, you asked her what happened and you indicated she didn't really tell you much. What,
No.
Why not? What was her condition like at that time?
She was very upset.
So the same upset that you were describing earlier, did that sort of continue throughout the time that she was on scene while you were there?
I would say yes.
And at some point, did you
Very
speak to Ms.
upset.
McCabe without
She
reference to what
seemed
she told you?
inebriated.
I'm sorry.
At some point while you're on scene, did you speak to either Ms. McCabe or Ms. Roberts without reference to what they told you?
No. I mean,
Let me rephrase.
phrase, yeah.
At some point when you're on scene, did you have occasion to have a conversation with Ms. McCabe?
Yes.
And at some point when you were on scene, did you have occasion to have a conversation with Ms. Roberts?
I didn't speak with Ms. Roberts, I don't believe.
Sometimes
Was there
it
someone
takes
else
a
in the
second to get
department
the
that was
question
speaking with
right.
Ms.
You know,
Roberts on scene?
that's fine.
You know,
I believe Sergeant Good or Officer Mulaney was.
one of the other 2 officers over there.
Correct.
Just because the
Now,
question came
following
out
Sergeant
funny the
Good's
first time
arrival,
doesn't mean
who,
it's
if
a
anyone
bad
else from the
question.
department arrived on scene at some point?
Detective Sergeant Lank, and Lieutenant Gallagher.
And if you know, when was their arrival in relation to sort of when you arrived?
It was light out, so I want to say maybe 7 o'clock-ish.
Okay.
And so for the period that you were on scene, you said it was about an hour and a half, is that correct?
That's about right.
The weather conditions that you described sort of when you first arrived, what if any change occurred in the weather conditions from the time that you arrived and the time that you left?
The conditions lightened up a little bit. I mean, it was still snowing, but
Still snowing, still cold, correct?
that's correct.
The wind, was that still persistent as well?
I would say yes.
Now, at some point
Wind.
after Ms. Reed, the defendant, left the scene, did she come back?
She did.
And do you know how long a period it was that she was gone between when she left and when she came back?
Wait, Karen
A
left
few
and came
minutes-
back.
excuse me, a few minutes.
And do you know why she came?
I don't know.
And when she returned to the scene, who, if anyone, did you speak with her further at that point?
No.
Who, if anyone, did you observe her to speaking?
I don't recall.
Now, the initial ambulance that showed up took and transported Mr. O'Keefe, is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, after that ambulance left and Ms. Reed came back to the scene, what, if any, other apparatus from the fire department arrived on scene at that point?
Another ambulance came.
And who, if anyone, went in that ambulance for transport?
They took Ms. Reed to the hospital.
And do you know what hospital that she went to?
I don't recall.
Why? Why did they take her to the hospital? Why do you
May I have one more?
like what?
Yes.
What? Why? Why did they take her to the hospital? Tell me why. Tell me why. Did Karen go to the hospital? Was it to get her blood tested for alcohol content?
Exhibit number 8 up on screen. Thank you very much. Now, Officer Sarif, do you recognize what's depicted up on the screen as exhibit number 8?
Yes,
What do you recognize that?
it's, the house, 34 Fairview.
And that's the house that you responded to on that date, is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
And what's contained in that photograph, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what you observed roughly when you arrived on that date?
Yes.
May I have a question?
Yes.
Direct your attention to this. This is just a way to.
Yep.
Basically, this button here, you just click on that. And we'll shine where you want. So from this photograph in exhibit number 8, sir, where Mr. O'Keefe's body was when you first arrived, is that visible in this photograph or no?
I would say it would be over more to the left.
Okay, so further off.
The
to left, is that
courtroom
correct?
layout
correct.
is absolutely atrocious. I can tell you more about it next time I see you, or at the end I can
Before
talk
we
about
get
it
to
again
that,
for
just
sure.
briefly,
I'll tell you
Ms. Gilman, if I
why.
could have exhibit number 13.
It's awful. I feel so
Good
bad
reason
for
why,
8
thank you.
months stuck in this courtroom.
Now, Officer Sarif, do you recognize what's contained in this exhibit number 13?
It's a street.
Fair enough. Fair approach to witness, Your Honor.
It's a street.
I'm sorry.
So what I placed before you was exhibit 13, is that what's up on the screen?
Okay, I'm looking.
Yes,
I
this is
can
this.
like see.
Is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what
Who
Fairview
took
Road
these
looked like around the
photos?
time that you
Or is
the
it
dispatch
just like
arrived
a
on scene?
screen
Yes.
grab from
Absence
like
the lighting condition? You mentioned it was dark when you arrived, right?
That's
So this is sometime after when the
police
sun is coming.
Correct.
footage
If I
or
could
something like
ask
the
you to
car
flip
cam
to the next
footage?
Exhibit number 14, if I could have that one. Soon.
I want to know because there's no way that was from an
Again,
iPhone
officer,
15
what's up on the screen?
or
Is that what you have
sorry,
before you as
2022
exhibit
iPhone
Yes.
13.
And you were testifying
There's no
earlier
way.
about sort of footprints in and around where Mr. O'Keefe was. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what's depicted on the screen in exhibit number 14, is that fair and accurate portrayal of the footprints that you were talking?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Footprints, and is that red? Is that red? Is that red?
So now I'm showing you what's been marked as exhibit 18. Thank you, Ms. Cameron. If you could enlarge that just a little bit. Thank you so much. Now from this photograph, well, first and foremost, do you recognize what's depicted up in exhibit 18 on the screen here?
Yes.
And this is 34 Fairview Road, correct?
That is correct.
And in regard to, you had mentioned some sort of landmark off to the left side of the property, you're facing the property from the street, correct?
Yes.
And if you could, using that laser pointer that I placed up there before you, if you could direct the jury's attention to first those landmarks that you. I'm sorry, officer, if you could, while you're.
Oh, sorry.
If you could just describe what you're.
So there's the flagpole right there. There's a bush there, and right there, I believe, is the fire hydrant.
Like, well, we
And
also,
so
yeah,
where in
we need to
relation
describe
this
it. We
photograph,
need,
if you can
I
see
need
it
the,
here, what Mr.
you
O'Keefe's
to
body was.
vocalize the
It's right in this area
description.
right here.
Now, if I could turn back just a moment, when you indicated that you were coming up to the scene and you could see the 3 females sort of waving and Mr. O'Keefe on the ground, correct?
That is correct.
About how far away were you from them when you first observed them or first saw them?
About 20 feet or so.
And when you are driving down Fairview, if you could describe to the jury, where is your direction? Sort of, where are you direct as far as you're driving a vehicle? Are you looking straight in front of you, or are you looking out the window? A combination of both, or
I was looking for the house numbers, trying to find the house where it was, and those I saw the motor vehicle parked on the side of the road.
and that sort of leads to my next question. So what did you see first? Did you see the vehicle parked in front of you, or did you see the people off to the side of
I saw the vehicle.
May I approach this to retrieve your?
Yes.
He knows what he saw. He remembers what he remembers, and
Do you want this?
he don't know what hospital Karen went to. You know, lights up. Remember when you were kids and like the
Officer,
lights
you
would
had-
turn? They always told you to close your eyes.
Testified earlier in regard to a camera within your cruiser, correct?
That's correct.
And subsequent to
is
that day, have you seen the video of your arrival to the scene from the cruiser camera perspective?
I saw it once.
And Your Honor, I would seek to introduce and admit as the next exhibits the cruiser camera stream 1 from cruiser 683.
Or is there an objection?
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I can reach across. I'm sorry for the back and forth, Mr. Officer, but if I could ask the lights again. Ms. Gilman, if you could play what's now been marked as exhibit 25.
I'm sorry for the back and forth.
And if you could just pause it right there, Ms. Gilman.
I'll take myself off so that we can see what's
Sarah.
happening.
What's up on the screen, is that what you recall as far as the sort of visibility and roadway conditions when you first left the church parking lot?
Yes.
And this is you sort of leaving from the church parking lot as you're going to 34th Fifth, correct?
Yes.
Now, there are a number of different sort of things up on this screen. There's an indication as far as the speed that the vehicle is going, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And where is that located, if you could, with the laser pointer there?
Sorry. Whoops, sorry.
I'm telling
Now,
you, you
along
can't
sort of
just
the
give
bottom
people
of
laser
that,
pointers.
particular video, there's an indication as far as mic, brakes, lights, sign, correct?
Correct.
If those are activated, is there any sort of change in sort of the depiction there? Does it change sort of color or anything like that that you're aware of?
I don't know.
And the 683 on the bottom right corner, is that the cruiser that you were in that day?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, as far as sort of the top middle of this video, there's a date and a time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
As far as you're aware, that date and time that's up there, that's accurate to when this occurred, correct?
Yes,
Okay, so we're sort of looking in real time, correct?
correct.
So Ms. Gilman, if you could just let it run.
Looking.
Ms. Gilman, I'm sorry, if you could stop with this brief. So Officer Sheriff, this road you're traversing at this point, this is Washington Street, is that correct?
That is correct.
And at some point, you're going to then travel through and then take a right onto Fairview, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. If you could, just for the jury's sake, as you approach Fairview and as you're taking that right turn, just direct their attention to the fact that that's when you're turning onto Fairview.
Sure.
Ms. Gilman, you can go ahead.
Put it at 1.5. He's just driving. He's going to tell us when he's going to turn and get on Fairview. You can see the snow coming up from the windshield, coming up from the side of the road. Lights to get through the light. The road looks awful. Ideal speed would probably be
So this right here is
max
Chapman Street.
15. Chapman Street. Unless you have a car like all-wheel drive style, it'd probably be very tough to drive in this snow, the amount of snow on the ground. It does look that like plows have been through, but there's still a layer of snow. So it is so cold, and it's been cold enough for the snow to stick to the ground as it's falling. Which, if you live in a place where it snows, you can recognize snow on a warmer day that doesn't stick
This right
to
here
like
is
concrete.
Fairview.
So we just turned on Fairview.
So, Officer, similar to as the turn onto Fairview, at some point, if you observe the point at which you believe you sort of illuminated your spotlight on the side of the cruiser, if you could just speak up and draw the jury's attention to that as well.
Okay.
Ms. Gilman, if you
He's
could.
gonna tell us when he illuminated his spotlight. Windshield wipers are killing me. Killing me.
Right about
It
now,
looked-
I believe I put the spotlight on.
Put the spotlight on.
It
It does look like a plow
about the 4-minute mark. And then I-
had gone down this street. It does look like a plow had gone down the street.
Right there.
Now, Officer Saraf, this is you were testifying earlier as far as the vehicle in front of you that you observed first, and then sort of the parties off to your left as far as the two females waving, and Mr. O'Keefe on the ground, correct?
That is correct.
And if you could, just using that laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to number one, where the vehicle is that you observed in front of you, and then number two, where you observed the three females and Mr. O'Keefe on the ground.
So here's the vehicle right there, and the females are right there.
Yeah, I can't make
Now, Ms.
that
Gilman,
out.
if you wouldn't mind just running this straight through until about 7.5 minutes.
Money. Oh, there's the movement that I saw. I would not have even. Okay, lights are on. It's so hard to see. To try to. You can get an idea of what he saw, but even through a camera in the car, you're not getting the same experience as what he's seeing actively on this while he was getting there, but it is much more helpful than not having the camera at all. You can hear the screaming from the three women. I would presume Karen, but that's total assumption. Mind you, this is on 1.25 speed or 1.5 speed. So you can hear the yelling. Fear, confusion, frustration. I want to know if he has a body cam on. Or if other officers on the scene had body cam on. This, it's all going to be given to us. Because he made note of the Karen,
One moment, John.
Sure.
saying the things that she was saying, but we didn't hear anything other
no further
than
questions,
just
this witness.
yelling.
All right. Will there be a cross-exam? Because this may be a good time to stop if there is.
There will be a cross-examination.
Okay. So jurors, we're going to stop for the day. I have to caution you those same three cautions. Please do not discuss this case with anyone. Don't do any independent research or investigation into this case. If you happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case, please disregard it and let us know. And just to remind you, tomorrow will be a half day. We'll go from 9 o'clock until 1 o'clock with the mid-morning. Thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right, please. Jurors, close your notebooks and leave them on your chairs. First roll call, please.
All right. Okay. So that was trial day 1. There are no more witnesses. I can take this out of my ear now and hear myself like a normal person. I might have to, this is going to be 8 weeks. I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do for audio so I can hear. Because I don't know if I'd like an earbud in my ear. So it was day 1 of trial. We had 3 witnesses. We had Paul O'Keefe, John, the deceased brother. We had Aaron O'Keefe, Paul's wife, and we had Officer Stephen Saraf. There will be a cross-examination to start day 2 of this officer. So we finally get some cross. There was not going to be any, there shouldn't be any cross for John's brother and his sister-in-law. It's just the basics of, these are the people that he is family, related to, blood, the relationship background, you could see the physical change, especially with Aaron. I thought she was a really good witness when it came to like the friendship that she had with Karen. So very interesting first day. I thought opening arguments were a little too many names, too much info. I think they dug a little too deep into the timeline when it came to the prosecution, the opening arguments. And this is all coming from a non-lawyer perspective. I am just the chatty juror. I am just experiencing this as a normal person, just like the jury. I thought the defense's opening statement was absolutely gripping. It was giving us as a jury the questions to ask when they were listening to the prosecution's case. And if they cannot answer those questions, that there is doubt, that there is reasonable doubt. And I thought that was really good. I'm not a lawyer, but I thought, they were giving me the questions. They're like, we will do the hard work for you. Here are the questions that can lead to reasonable doubt. I'm giving it to you. You have it right here. So I thought it was great. I thought he was powerful. I thought the speed was good. And we were listening to that at normal speed. So, Dude Icarus asked about or mentioned the courtroom layout. Yes, the courtroom is terrible. It sucks. It's awful. The original courtroom that they were in had issues with the which is why trial started like a week later. Anyway, the original courtroom had issues with the witness stand, how the jury box, a good portion of the jury would only see the back of a witness's head, and that is unacceptable. Even though it's been like that for a long time, the defense found that to be unacceptable and that the jury needs to be able to see the witness's face, body language as they speak and testify. So they changed it. They found a smaller one that fits the needs and the requests. So that is what it is. There's not going to be much viewer room. It's basically going to be family, close friends, and press in there, which is interesting. So that's day one. Tomorrow, I will probably be starting at 9 a.m. for day two. We are going to get day two done. We might be able to get into day three, depending. Maybe in the afternoon tomorrow, we'll be able to start the morning of day two, just kind of try to slowly catch up a little bit. But yeah, so that is day one, murder trial, Karen Reed in Dedham, Massachusetts. So I'm going to go. I got to go to work. I'm going to go to work. And thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. If you have not already, please subscribe. This is where Lily's News is going to be living. And Lily's News is right now the Chatty Juror, being chatty as a juror on a trial. Oh, it's so exciting. I'm having so much fun already. Thanks for being here. I will see you guys tomorrow. Be good. Bye.